Karen's father is quite wealthy, isn't he? Yes, when he passes, Karen's set to inherit a significant fortune. I reckon it could be around 100 million. Incredible. I can hardly wait. Once that happens, I'm hoping Karen might whisk me away on a luxurious vacation. Sounds delightful. Maybe I'll put in a request for a new car. James, what about you? Well, I've had my eye on a top-of-the-line gaming rig for ages. I wonder if I could subtly suggest it to her. Their conversation bubbled with excitement, oblivious to the solemn expression on my face just outside the door. I clutched my purse tightly. My name is Karen, and I first met my husband James at a bustling social club for professionals. Our shared interests sparked an instant connection, and we've been happily enjoying life together ever since. One day, my routine was disrupted by an unexpected call from my mother. Karen, your father has collapsed. What? My father, known for his jovial spirit and love for dad jokes, was the picture of health. He ran his own company with ease, making the idea of his collapse incomprehensible. Concerned for my father, I immediately left home and caught the next train to the hospital my mother had mentioned. My father was truly a gentle soul. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time for my brother and me, lifting us onto his shoulders and playing with us. I vividly recall his tears of joy as I read a letter to my parents at my wedding to James. The memory was etched in my mind. The thought of such a man falling ill was heart-wrenching. Refusing to accept the news, I hurried to the hospital where my mother sat by my father's side. As soon as I entered, my mother turned to me. Mom, how's Dad? Is he okay? Karen, please let's stay calm and I'll explain. Facing my father lying on the bed, his eyes closed, my mother detailed his condition. He had collapsed suddenly at work, prompting an urgent trip to the hospital. Despite numerous tests, no clear cause for his illness emerged. Further examinations might yield answers, but they also posed risks to his already fragile state. Consequently, my mother had opted to halt the tests. It appears your father may experience paralysis on the left side of his body. So, he'll need ongoing care. Yes, that's correct. Despite the weight of the news, my mother maintained a composed demeanor as she spoke. My mother had already resigned herself to caring for my dad. Contemplating this, I sensed my mother's resilience, yet I was also consumed by sadness at the prospect of my father's changed state. Struggling to contain my emotions, my brother burst into the room. How's Dad? He asked, breathless. My mother repeated the details of my father's condition to him as she had to me. Mom, you can't do this alone. I'm nearby. I'll come help. Thank you, but you need to prioritize your own life. You have your own family now. My brother, understanding, nodded. I understand. My brother had married years before I did and now has a 4-year-old daughter. The one with more flexibility in their schedule is me, the one without children. However, it would still take me an hour by train to reach our childhood home. I might be distant and it could take some time, but I won't leave all of this burden on you and Mom. If there's any change with Dad, don't hesitate to inform me. Agreed, but Karen, did you inform John before coming here? I suddenly realized I'd left home in a hurry without informing John. Seeing my expression, my brother added, be sure to reach out to him. He must be anxious. Leaving the hospital room swiftly, I found a quiet spot to call John. As soon as he answered, he asked, Karen, where are you? I've been worried sick. Hearing John's voice offered some comfort, yet tears welled up as I explained that my father had collapsed and would require care. Your lively dad. John's shock was palpable, yet his gentle words offered solace. Grateful for marrying him, I informed him of my return home. His gentle response was, I'll prepare dinner. Take care on your way back. With my father set to spend the night in the hospital, and my mother and brother returning home, I opted to head back as well. Arriving home, I found John had prepared my favorite meal. It must have been rough. Have something you love to lift your spirits, he said, pulling out a chair for me. His kindness moved me to tears. While John typically remains composed, his warmth during my lowest moments always touches me deeply. Thanking him for his support, I retired to bed early that evening. The following morning, feeling a bit more composed, I approached John with the idea of assisting in my father's care occasionally. He readily agreed. It turned out that John had already informed his parents about my father's condition, and they offered their assistance with household chores during my absences. I was pleasantly surprised by the full support extended by John's family. When I called to express my gratitude, John's mother chuckled and reassured me. Your father is like family to us. Don't worry about a thing. John's parents, much like him, typically exude composure. Their arrival at our home with smiles and offers of help with chores left me momentarily stunned, a gesture of familial warmth I hadn't experienced before my marriage. Initially, I had perceived my in-laws as somewhat distant, but perhaps I had misunderstood. I made sure to express my heartfelt gratitude to James and my in-laws for their unwavering support in caring for my father. Once a lively conversationalist, my father's ability to speak fluently was hindered by the paralysis on his left side. Yet there was a glimmer of hope in his right-handedness. Using a whiteboard, he conveyed his needs and shared his signature dad jokes through crude drawings and written messages, lifting our spirits despite his near-constant confinement to bed. While my brother offered assistance, it was predominantly my sister-in-law who took on the caregiving role. With her background in caregiving, she patiently and kindly instructed both my mother and me on how best to aid my father. My mother, and I harbored concerns that my sister-in-law might balk at caring for my father, who wasn't related by blood. However, to our relief, she welcomed the responsibility with open arms. Her cheerful declaration, "Your father has brought me so much joy. Now it's my turn to bring him happiness," illuminated her kind nature, reaffirming my belief that my brother had chosen a remarkable partner. While my brother may have found an exceptional spouse, I found solace in knowing that my own spouse was equally supportive. My entire in-law family rallied behind me in my caregiving efforts, always inquiring about my father's well-being whenever I visited to assist him. Their genuine concern never failed to touch my heart. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps I had misjudged them. One day, as I left home to tend to my father, I realized I had forgotten my wallet upon reaching the station. Frustrated with my own absent-mindedness, I returned home. On days when I went to care for my father, my in-laws would often lend a hand with household chores, so I anticipated they might find my blunder amusing. As I re-entered the house to retrieve my wallet, I overheard a conversation between James and my in-laws in the living room. "Are we certain Karen's father isn't about to kick the bucket? I'm tired of this waiting game." "Huh?" Pausing mid-step, I questioned whether my ears deceived me. Leaning closer to the living room door, I caught their conversation with clarity. "Speaking of which, how much does Karen stand to inherit once her father bites the dust? We've been playing nice, but it only makes sense if we're getting a hefty chunk. Her old man's loaded, you know. When he croaks, she's set to rake in a fortune. I bet it's over 100 mil, right? Geez, that's insane. I'm counting down the days. Once her old man kicks it, I'm hoping she'll whisk me off on a vacation." "That sounds lovely. Maybe I'll put in a request for a car." "James, what about you?" I've been eyeing the top-of-the-line gaming rig for ages. I'm wondering if I can drop a hint for Karen to get me one." Their conversation bubbled with excitement, unaware of the storm raging behind the door. I clutched my wallet tightly, channeling all my emotions into that grip. Anger, frustration, and sadness churned within me, a turbulent whirlpool of thoughts and feelings. Careful not to disturb James and his family in the living room, I slipped out of the house, my mind still reeling. Their sudden kindness felt suspicious, tinged with the scent of greed. My father's inheritance loomed large, a tempting prize for those with less than honorable intentions. But I couldn't bear to entertain the notion that my in-laws were eagerly awaiting his demise. Lost in my turmoil, I found myself sitting on a bench at the local station near my parents' home, the echoes of James and his family's laughter haunting my thoughts. "I won't forgive them. Never," I muttered under my breath, seething with anger. I vowed to exact revenge on James and his conniving family who valued my father, the man who raised me with love, solely for his wealth. Pretending ignorance of their callous conversation, I played along, maintaining my usual polite facade and expressing gratitude for their concern about my father's health. Determined to turn the tables, I resolved to exploit James and my avaricious in-laws for all they were worth. I extended my visits. I dedicated myself to caring for my father while unceremoniously delegating household chores to my in-laws. My money-hungry in-laws readily complied with any requests I made. I noticed the subtle tightening of their faces and James' expression at times, but I paid it no mind. A year passed, and my father's condition deteriorated further. Though the doctor assured me it wasn't urgent, I couldn't shake off a sense of relief. However, when I shared the news of my father's declining health with James and my in-laws, their barely concealed grins betrayed their true intentions. It was the moment they had been waiting for. With resolve, I handed them the divorce papers. Thank you for all your assistance. Please let's part ways. As I made my declaration, James and my in-laws were stunned into silence, but I remained composed as I delivered my prepared speech. So, James, mother-in-law, father-in-law, it's clear you were eyeing my father's inheritance, weren't you? I heard everything. Mother-in-law dreaming of vacations, father-in-law longing for a new car, and James craving that gaming computer. Am I right? I can't stay with people eagerly anticipating my father's demise. The expressions you wore just now were repulsive. It was as if I could see straight through to your crass desires for money upon my father's passing. My words seemed to strike fear into them, their faces frozen in shock. My in-laws remained motionless, while James, clutching the divorce papers, was at a loss for words, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief. It was clear I had no place in this household any longer. You can send the divorce papers by mail, but if you don't, I'll hire a lawyer. Please ensure it's done within a week, I informed James, my voice steady. After collecting the luggage I had prepared earlier, I exited our home. As the train gently rocked me on my journey back to my parents' house, I felt a sense of calm envelop me. Upon my arrival, my parents greeted me warmly. Having confided in my mother about the situation, she enveloped me in a comforting embrace, offering words of encouragement. It was a moment of vulnerability I hadn't experienced since I'd become an adult. The following day, James and my in-laws arrived at my parents' home. Choosing to remain hidden, I observed from afar. When my mother opened the front door, I watched as James and my in-laws knelt before her. We apologize. We want to apologize to Karen. It seems there's been a misunderstanding. Please allow us to apologize to her properly, they pleaded. Misunderstanding. My daughter overheard your conversation. It seems you've been eyeing my husband's inheritance. I don't want any association with people like that, my mother declared, her tone sharp and final. Despite her dismissal, James persisted, pleading to see me. I can't allow it. Karen doesn't want to see you. She doesn't seek apologies. She wants those divorce papers filled out. Have you done it? Hand them over, my mother demanded. Please, just one more chance, James pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. As James cried out, the sound of a cane tapping echoed from within the house. Turning to look, I saw my father, leaning on his cane with my sister-in-law's support. Father-in-law? James's mouth fell open at the sight of my father, whom he had only heard about. Holding up a whiteboard, my father conveyed a powerful message. I won't surrender my daughter to someone who can't bring her happiness. Grant her wish and proceed with the divorce. The message, penned with resolve, seemed to strike a chord with James and my in-laws more than any other words spoken. It was evident they realized further debate was futile. Slowly, James rose to his feet, followed by my in-laws. I've completed the divorce papers. Here they are, James announced, handing the documents to my mother. He assured her he would inform me once he had filed them with the city hall. With that, my mother bid them farewell. Emerging from my hiding place, I expressed my gratitude. Thank you, Mom and Dad. My mother responded with a gentle smile, while my father let out a hearty laugh and wrote a message on the whiteboard. A father's duty is to protect his daughter until the end. Reading those words on the whiteboard, tears welled up in my eyes. Despite the paralysis on his left side, my father's kindness and love remained unchanged. I had mistakenly believed that he was no longer the father I knew, but it couldn't have been more wrong. He was still the same dependable father who always prioritized my well-being. Dad, I wish for you to live a long, happy life, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. With tears streaming down my face, I expressed my wish to him, and he responded with a beaming grin. Since then, James has returned to his parents' home, seemingly leading a quiet life with them. As for me, I've adapted to the routine of caring for my father while juggling work commitments. It's a hectic life, but I remember how my father always made time to play with my brother and me when we were young. With that memory in mind, neither my brother nor I feel burdened by caring for him, no matter how busy we become. Despite being partially bedridden and having lost weight, my father's spirit remains unchanged. His infectious laughter and love for dad jokes continue to brighten our days. My sister-in-law often remarks how caring for my playful father brings her joy, allowing us to maintain a peaceful existence.
As I sat at the elegantly set Thanksgiving dinner table in my parents' house, surrounded by the comforting familiarity of my childhood home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. At 60, These visits had become my refuge from the stifling atmosphere of my own home. The lively chatter of my daughter Emma with her grandmother filled the room, a stark contrast to the silence that often enveloped my conversations with Richard, my husband. My phone vibrated sharply, disrupting the warmth of the moment. Richard's name flashed across the screen, sending a shiver down my spine. With a hesitant sigh, I excused myself. "Excuse me, it's Richard. I'll just take this in the kitchen." But as I rose, my fingers slipped and the phone speaker activated. "Elaine, having fun over there?" "Well, don't bother coming back." Richard's voice, unnaturally cheerful, echoed through the room. I stood frozen, phone in hand, as his words hung in the air. "What are you talking about, Richard?" "Oh, I've decided it's time for a change. I've moved Emma's stuff into the house. There's no room for you anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's fork dropped with a clatter, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Richard, what in the world are you saying?" My voice was barely above a whisper, heart pounding in my chest. "It's simple, really. Emma doesn't want to come home because of you. Without you, she can finally live the life she deserves, like when she was a child. So leave." Emma stood up abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. "Dad, what are you—" "Stay out of this, Emma." Richard's voice cut through, sharp and cold. "This is between me and your mother." My cheeks burned with a mix of humiliation and anger. "You want me to leave our home? Just like that?" "Yes, and you can go to some shelter or whatever. Doesn't matter to me." The call ended abruptly, leaving a haunting silence. My mother reached out, her hand trembling. "Elaine, honey." But before she could finish, Emma burst into laughter, incredulous and bitter. "He's lost it, Grandma, completely lost it." Inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions. Humiliation, anger, and a strange sense of liberation. He better be ready, I thought to myself. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. As I lay in my childhood bed that night, the moonlight casting shadows across the room, my mind wandered back through the years, sifting through memories of Richard and me. Our story wasn't always filled with cold silences and bitter words. There was a time when Richard's gaze held warmth, and his touch promised safety. I met Richard when I was in my late 20s. He was charming, confident, and seemed to have an answer for everything. I was captivated by his charisma and how he seemed to take the world in his stride. We married within a year of meeting, a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale. But the fairy tale began to crumble soon after Emma was born. Richard's affection for our daughter was undeniable, yet as his love for her grew, his regard for me seemed to wane. It was as if his heart had room only for one. "Elaine, can't you see you're smothering her?" "Let her breathe," he would chide whenever I tried to be involved in Emma's upbringing. His words stung, but I believed he was just being an overly protective father. As Emma grew, so did Richard's disdain towards me. The man who once looked at me like I was his world now barely acknowledged my existence, except to criticize. "Why can't you be more like Emma? She's only 10 and already so independent," he'd say with a sneer. I remember the night when Emma, at 15, won a school award. We were supposed to celebrate as a family, but Richard turned it into a lecture session. "Elaine, why can't you achieve anything like our daughter? You're just wasting your life away," he said, his words like daggers. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of years of his contempt. It wasn't just the words, it was the dismissive glances, the heavy sighs, the way he'd turn away when I entered a room. I had become a ghost in my own home, invisible and insignificant. But that night, as I lay in the quiet, a resolve began to stir within me. Richard's callousness on the phone, his brazen dismissal of our life together, it had lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to let him erase me from my own story. I turned on my side, closing my eyes, but sleep eluded me. The shadows on the wall seemed to whisper, urging me to stand up, to fight back. And I knew, deep down, that I was ready to do just that. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Over breakfast, Mom tried to discuss Richard's call, but I steered the conversation elsewhere. I wasn't ready to delve into that can of worms, not yet. Emma, sensing my unease, didn't press either. As we cleaned up, my thoughts drifted back to the recent years with Richard. His controlling behavior wasn't just confined to our daughter. It seeped into every aspect of our lives, tightening like a vice around my freedom. "Elaine, I don't want you working late. You need to be home to cook dinner," he would demand, disregarding my career in the library, which I cherished. His rules were arbitrary and ever-changing, designed to keep me off balance. If I wore something he didn't approve of, he would scoff. Dressing up? Trying to impress someone? You should focus on being a better wife and mother. Even my friendships weren't spared. You're spending too much time with Linda. She's a bad influence, he declared one day, his words slicing through years of friendship like a knife. But it wasn't just the control. It was the humiliation. At social gatherings, he would belittle me with backhanded compliments, often in front of Emma. Elaine tries her best, but you know, she's not the brightest bulb, he'd say with a laugh that made my skin crawl. Emma saw it all. At first, she tried to defend me, but Richard's influence was too strong. "Mom, just ignore him," she would whisper, a look of helplessness in her eyes. I remember the day Emma left for college. Richard was beaming with pride, but there was a coldness in his eyes when he turned to me. "See, Elaine, this is what happens when you raise a child right. She's not like you, thank God." That stung more than anything. The implication that I had no part in our daughter's upbringing, that my years of love and sacrifice meant nothing. As these memories churned in my mind, a simmering anger began to bubble to the surface. No more. I wouldn't let Richard dictate my life, not anymore. The phone call was the last straw. It was time for Richard to face the consequences of his actions. I looked at Emma, her face a mirror of my resolve. "Emma, there's something I need to do when we get back. It's going to change everything, but I need you to trust me." Emma nodded, determination in her eyes. "I'm with you, Mom, all the way." The drive back home was filled with a tense silence. Emma and I were both lost in our thoughts as the weight of the impending confrontation with Richard hanging heavy in the air. Once home, I retreated to my room, ostensibly to unpack, but really to make a call that would set everything in motion. I dialed the number of a divorce attorney I had discreetly noted down a few months ago. My hands trembled as I heard the line connect. "Hello, this is Elaine Richardson. I need to discuss a divorce." The lawyer, Mr. Adams, was calm and reassuring. "I understand this is a difficult time, Mrs. Richardson. We can help you navigate through this process." As I detailed Richard's behavior over the years, Mr. Adams listened intently. "We can file for divorce on grounds of emotional abuse. It seems you have a strong case." Feeling a sense of empowerment, I replied, "I want to go through with this, and I want him to pay for what he's done, not just legally, but financially too." Mr. Adams assured me, "We will do everything we can to ensure you receive what you're entitled to." After the call, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life. Later that evening, Richard returned home, his demeanor smug and triumphant. "So, you're back. Realized you have nowhere else to go?" His words cut deep, but I held my ground. "I went to my parents' house, Richard. Remember the place you practically banished me to?" He scoffed. "I did us a favor. Emma and I are better off without you." "That's where you're wrong," I said, my voice steady. "Emma is not a pawn in your twisted game, and I am not your prisoner anymore." Richard's face contorted in anger. "What are you blabbering about? You think you can survive without me?" I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. "Watch me." Emma entered the room, her expression one of quiet strength. "Dad, you've gone too far. Mom doesn't deserve this." Richard sneered. "Oh, now you're taking her side? I thought you understood, Emma. Your mother is useless." Emma's eyes blazed with anger. "No, Dad. The only useless thing here is your cruelty. We're done living under your shadow." As we stood there, united against Richard's scorn, I knew we had crossed a point of no return. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for my freedom. The morning after our declaration, the house felt like a battlefield. Richard's usual air of arrogance was more pronounced, as if he was daring us to challenge him. As I made breakfast, my hands shook slightly, but my resolve was firm. At the table, Richard broke the silence with his typical condescension. "So, Elaine, have you finally realized your place? Ready to beg for forgiveness?" I kept my voice calm. "There's nothing to beg for, Richard. I'm not the one who should be apologizing." He laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "You've always been delusional, but this is a new low, even for you." Emma, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Dad, this isn't a joke. We're serious. Mom is filing for divorce." The look on Richard's face was one I had never seen before. Confusion, disbelief, and then anger. Divorce? You think you can just walk away from me after everything I've done for this family? It's precisely because of what you've done, I said, my voice rising. Years of belittling, controlling, and humiliating me. I won't stand for it anymore. Richard slammed his fist on the table, his face red. I made this family. Without me, you're nothing. Emma stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You didn't make this family, Dad. You tore it apart. And Mom is more than something. She's everything you're not. His gaze shifted between us, a wild look in his eyes. You're teaming up against me, your own husband, your own father? This isn't about sides, Richard. It's about right and wrong. I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. And what you've done is unforgivably wrong. Richard's laughter was bitter. You think you can just leave and everything will be fine? You have no idea what you're in for. I met his gaze squarely. I know exactly what I'm in for. Freedom from you. Emma moved to stand beside me, a united front. We're done being under your control, Dad. It's over. Richard stood abruptly, his chair toppling behind him. You'll regret this, both of you. You don't know what I'm capable of. As he stormed out of the room, the tension he left behind was suffocating. But amidst that tension, there was also a sense of liberation. The battle had begun, and I was ready to fight for my freedom, my dignity, and my daughter's future. The days following our confrontation with Richard were a whirlwind of activity. I met with Mr. Adams several times, laying out the groundwork for the divorce. He was meticulous, ensuring every detail was accounted for. We'll make sure you get what you deserve, Elaine, both financially and legally, he assured me. Richard's reaction to the divorce papers was volcanic. He stormed into the house one evening, papers in hand, his face a mask of fury. You're actually going through with this? Do you have any idea what you're doing, Elaine? I faced him with a calm I didn't feel. Yes, Richard, I do. For the first time in years, I'm making a decision for myself. He laughed mockingly. You think you can survive without me? You're nothing without my money, my support. I'm not afraid of being on my own, Richard. I'm more afraid of spending another day under the same roof as you, I replied, my voice steady. Emma, hearing the commotion, came downstairs. What's going on? Your mother has lost her mind. That's what's going on, Richard spat out. She thinks she can just take half of everything I've worked for. It's not just what you've worked for, Dad. It's what Mom has endured for all these years. She deserves every penny and more. Emma countered. Richard's eyes narrowed. Don't be foolish, Emma. This will ruin us all. No, Dad, it will free us, especially Mom. As the days turned into weeks, the house became a cold war zone. Richard moved into the guest room, his presence like a dark cloud. Despite his attempts to sway me, my decision was final. The day of the first court hearing arrived. As I sat in the courtroom, waiting for the proceedings to start, I felt an odd sense of serenity. I was doing the right thing, not just for myself, but for Emma as well. Richard, on the other hand, was a bundle of nerves. When his lawyer talked about a settlement, I couldn't help but smile. Richard, who always prided himself on his control, was now at the mercy of the court. As the judge reviewed our case, Richard's face grew paler. When the judge turned to me and asked if I had anything to add, I took a deep breath. Your Honor, for years I endured emotional abuse and manipulation at the hands of my husband. I'm not seeking revenge, I'm seeking justice, for myself and for my daughter. The judge nodded, his expression solemn. I understand, Mrs. Richardson. This court will ensure fair judgment is passed. As we left the courtroom, Richard's defeated look was all I needed to see. The battle wasn't over, but I had won the first round, and I was ready for whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, my life felt like it was under a microscope, scrutinized by lawyers in the court. But with each passing day, I felt stronger, more in control of my destiny. Richard's attempts to intimidate me became more desperate and less effective. The final court hearing was a day I had both dreaded and longed for. As Richard and I sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, I couldn't help but reflect on the man I once loved, now a stranger filled with bitterness. The judge's voice was firm as he delivered the verdict. The court finds in favor of Mrs. Richardson. Mr. Richardson, you are required to pay alimony and half of your assets. Richard's face was a picture of shock and rage. He stood up abruptly, his chair clattering to the floor. This is ridiculous. She doesn't deserve a penny. Mr. Richardson, control yourself, the judge admonished. The court has made its decision. As we left the courtroom, Richard's parting words were venomous. You'll regret this, Elaine. You think you've won, but you haven't seen the end of me. But I no longer feared him. His words, once so cutting, now seemed empty and powerless. In the months that followed, I found a small apartment close to Emma's place. I started a new job at a local library, a place that had always brought me peace. The alimony from Richard allowed me financial freedom I hadn't experienced in years. Emma and I grew closer, our relationship no longer overshadowed by Richard's presence. She was thriving in her career and personal life, a stark contrast to the frightened young woman she had been. As for Richard, the last I heard, he was living a diminished life, his pride and finances greatly reduced. His attempts to reach out to Emma and me were met with silence. The man who once held so much power over us was now just a memory, a shadow of the past. I often sit on my balcony, a cup of tea in hand, looking out at the peaceful neighborhood. I've found a sense of tranquility and purpose that was missing for so long. The journey was painful, filled with struggles and heartaches, but it led me to a place of peace. Emma visits often, and we talk about everything and nothing. Our bond, forged in adversity, is now unbreakable. As I look towards the future, I do so with hope and a sense of freedom. I've emerged from the shadows of my past stronger and more resilient. I've learned that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest triumphs. And as for Richard, he is nothing more than a distant echo, a reminder of a life I once lived and the strength I gained in leaving it behind. Marco's laugh echoed in my mind. You wouldn't last a day without me, Elena. That's when I decided our cozy suburban home would make a lovely, just-sold postcard to mail to his office. My name is Elena Vasquez, and life had a way of testing me. 5 years ago, I married Marco, a charming coworker with a sharp wit and an alluring smile. Fallen by a mutual passion for success, we became a power couple at the office, only to face our vulnerability at home. The dream of nurturing a family together began to crumble with each failed pregnancy test. The hallways of fertility clinics became painfully familiar as we exhausted options, drained emotions, and dwindled savings. By the time I felt the first flutters of life within me, I had weathered a storm of hormone injections and hope. It wasn't just one heartbeat echoing during the ultrasound. It was 2. We named our miracles Gabriel and Sophia. Marco's initial elation at the news of twins soon faded into a distant interest. His involvement was sporadic at best, absent at most. Nights blurred with feedings and diaper changes, often solo endeavors, as Marco distanced himself, citing workplace exhaustion. My love for the twins was unbounded, but in the dark circles under my eyes and the ache in my bones, I knew this wasn't the partnership I'd signed up for. Gabriel and Sophia arrived early, fighters from the start. While they lay in the NICU, I laid plans for their future. But Marco, he was like an anchor, dragging my determination through the murky waters of doubt. I pledged to myself that our children would never feel the burden of their father's inattention, a vow heavy with consequence and courage. The first year of their life tested everything I knew about strength. As my body labored to recover, my resolve strained under the weight of Marco's apathy. Support. He called his occasional peeks into their nursery, peppering his absence with excuses and unfulfilled promises. The inequality of our roles grew, a chasm I could no longer bridge with love alone. Yet, the thought of leaving never gained momentum for long. My father had grown sick, the kind of illness that drains life in slow sips. With my mother having passed years before, he had nobody else. And as for me, with no job and savings devoured by IVF, I was tethered to Marco's erratic benevolence like a boat adrift, dependent on his mercies and whims. That day when the vase shattered against the floor, the water drenching my skin, I understood the capacity of our bond's fracture. But I had made a choice to ensure it would not break me. I mopped the floors, silenced the warning of desperation in my heart, and planned. Because all it takes is a moment for fate to align with fortitude, and that moment had come. I just had to reach out and grasp it tightly. The morning sun slanted through the blinds, casting long shadows across what was once a nursery, now a war zone of scattered toys and overturned furniture. Sophia's wails cut through the silence, a shrill reminder that today, like every other day, I would face alone. Gabriel, Ever the explorer had managed to find the one remaining family heirloom, a silver picture frame my grandmother had given me, and was using it as a chew toy. I wrestled it away, my heart sinking. The last piece of my past, the last bit of value I owned other than the roof over our heads, would soon have to be sold. The weight of that decision pulled at my chest, a physical ache that seemed to spread with each labored breath. As much as that frame was a symbol of my heritage, it was now a lifeline, a ticket to keep the lights on and the cupboards from growing bare. Marco, on the other hand, remained blissfully oblivious to the depth of our financial troubles. He had a knack for evading responsibility, an art form he had perfected over the years. I returned to the workforce not by choice but necessity, dropping the twins off at a daycare that drained an already sparse bank account. My absence from the office had made me a stranger in the world I used to dominate, my confidence replaced with apologies and hasty exits whenever the daycare would call about another fever or cough. My supervisors were understanding, yet their patience had limits I dared not test. Each sick day, each rush home felt like a twisted countdown to my professional demise. On one occasion, I mustered the courage to ask Marco for help, yet his excuses danced around any reasonable offer. "I can't. I have a meeting," he would say, or, "They're just kids, they get sick." The burden of solo parenting lay heavy on my shoulders, a mantle I wore out of love for my children, but it was wearing me thin. Resignation from my job was not a choice but a conclusion, the result of countless pressures culminating in a silent scream for reprieve. I confided in my father, whose frailty belied a fierce will. "Elena, my girl, you've borne more than anyone should," he whispered, drawing me close. His hands, once strong, now trembled against my back. "Let me take some of this weight." But how could I? His health teetered on a precarious edge, his life a finicky balance of medication and rest. Adding my burdens to his would be unforgivable. Yet, he insisted, adamant in his resolve. "Family lifts each other up," he said, his voice a feather yet heavy with conviction. "We'll find our way through this, just you wait." My father's assurance was a balm, but it couldn't replace a paycheck. The guilt was a routine visitor, making itself at home within me as I saw the worry etch deeper into his face with every passing day. I was trapped, not by love or duty, but by necessity, a slave to the circumstances I couldn't escape. The silver frame sold to a faceless buyer for a soul-crushing sum, all too soon spent on necessities. As I slid the money over the counter for a week's worth of groceries, the reality of my situation seemed to sharpen into painful focus. I was at the end of my rope, the ends frayed and unwinding. It was time for the charade to end. It was time to fight back. Uneasy light filtered through the blinds, casting a dull glow over the toys strewn across the floor. The walls of our home, a place that once harbored the whispers of shared dreams, now stood silent, guarding the secret of my crumbling marriage. As Marco's shadow loomed large and menacing within our lives, my space for hope dwindled. His ire had no bounds, no line it wouldn't cross. His voice, once soft and filled with affection, now clenched with contempt. He was a tempest, his anger the crashing waves, and I, a ship made of glass, threatened to shatter with the smallest misstep. The day he hurled his cell phone across the room, narrowly missing Gabriel, who giggled, oblivious to the danger, was the day my tolerance reached its nadir. But there was a spark, faint and flickering, in the gloom. A ray of light began to slip through the shadows. My father. With his health improving and Grandma finally settled into a nursing facility, he was determined to shoulder part of my burden. His arrival marked the first breath of fresh air in a home that had grown stifling. "Lean on me, Elena," he urged, taking the twins in his arms with surprising dexterity for his age. "I'm not made of glass. Let me help you rebuild." And so, with the twins in safer hands, I set off to reclaim the life I had on hold. I reached out to Isabel, my former boss and mentor, who had risen through the ranks with a grace I had always admired. The call was the first step in executing the plan that had brewed in the recesses of my mind, our small act of defiance against Marco's tyranny. "Isabel, it's Elena. I'm thinking of returning to work," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Isabel's response was prompt, sympathetic to the point of painful. "I suspected as much," she confided, a hint of something more in her tone. "There's been something you should know about Marco. Can you come in tomorrow?" The next day, the old familiarity of the office wrapped around me like a well-worn glove as I sat across from Isabel. Despite our formal attire and the polished wood of the desk between us, the atmosphere was intimate, protectively confidential. "He's been unfaithful, Elena," Isabel divulged, cutting straight to the heart of a truth I had already sensed. "With a client's daughter. It's more than gossip. There are receipts, and, well, people have seen them together." The realization stung, a sickening confirmation of the distance between us, yet it was ammunition for what was to come. It propelled me forward, a catalyst for my resolve. I laid bare my intentions for divorce, my need for independence, and Isabel responded not just with support, but with action. She fast-tracked my return to the company, championing my cause with the vigor of a true ally. With every piece that fell into place, I saw the path before me clear, and with a surge of newfound courage I was ready to make move. The evening I set my plan in motion. The house felt larger, the silence louder. Outside, the sunset bled across the sky, a canvas of defiance. Inside, my father whispered stories to the twins as I packed their bags, preparing for the upheaval to come. Marco's business trip was a timely blessing, and with the ink still wet on my letter of resignation, I knew there would be no turning back this time. Every item packed away, every photograph removed from the walls, was a declaration. I was off to change the locks, hand over the house keys to the realtor, and finally step out of the prison Marco had unwittingly built around us. The following morning I left our now bare house, the echo of emptiness reverberating with each step I took. Walking into the office, my nerves buzzed undeniably. A mix of anxiety and adrenaline surged through me. The familiar sights and sounds of the workplace greeted me like old friends long missed. Isabel welcomed me with a warm, conspiratorial smile that did little to quell the flurry of butterflies in my stomach. "You're doing the right thing," Isabel reassured, her gaze steady, her words a solid anchor. "You're taking back control." Her office, once a place where I got career advice, now served as the backdrop to the unfolding drama of my personal life. Isabel closed the door with a decisive click and, without preamble, unveiled Marco's betrayal in somber detail. He had taken far more than his share of liberties. His affair with the daughter of one of our clients, not just an insult but a liability. It wasn't just our company's reputation at stake but his professional future. Images of them together lurched at me from the fringes of my mind, yet the revelation steeled me. I wouldn't let his indiscretions be my undoing. "Thank you," I murmured, the weight of the situation settling around me like a cloak. "He won't get away with this." Isabel proceeded to lay out the groundwork for my return to work. As it turned out, they needed someone with my expertise and experience. "It's your second act, Elena," she said, her voice a blend of excitement and firm resolution. But the opportunities didn't end there. After discussing possible starts and positions, Isabel revealed another game-changing detail: a newly implemented on-site daycare, a solution to one of the many complicated puzzles of my life. There was a light at the end of the tunnel, and it was finally bright enough to chase away the shadows that had settled in my heart. Armed with this fresh knowledge and a plan that grew bolder by the minute, I left Isabel's office poised for the impending confrontation. The empty house wasn't just a sign of a life shed. It was the first stone in the foundation of a new one. My father, God bless his resolute heart, backed me every step of the way. It was our secret, a quiet rebellion danced out in the signing of papers and whispers of change. The real estate agent, understanding the delicacy of the situation, had agreed to act quickly. As I met with the realtor, who was keen to capitalize on the property's prime location, I signed off on what was undeniably my most assertive act yet. The house was more mine than Marco's, purchased with my pre-marriage savings and therefore mine to sell. I reflected, not without a twinge of irony, how little Marco had cared for the old place, dismissing it as a temporary inconvenience while we climbed the corporate ladder. Yet now it would become the very instrument of my liberation. The plan was set into motion with a precision that would have impressed even my toughest critics at work. With the realtor's help, we moved swiftly, securing a buyer and moving my family into a comfortable rental. My father, with renewed vigor, was already making the space our own, filling it with laughter and plans for the future. As I lay in bed that evening, staring at the ceiling in the quiet before sleep, the enormity of what I'd done began to sink in. I'd taken back my life, my children's future, and secured our escape. There was no turning back now. The glass doors of the office building seemed heavier than I remembered, but today they parted with the promise of new beginnings. A chorus of unfamiliar yet friendly faces welcomed me, the employees I would soon work alongside. With each step, I anchored myself in the reality of my fresh start. The cloak of anonymity I'd worn during my time away had been shed. I was Elena Vasquez, soon to be Elena Vasquez, single mother and respected professional. Marco, however, remained a storm cloud on the horizon of my newfound clarity. It wasn't long before I heard the familiar cadence of his voice echoing down the hallway as he approached. There was a frantic edge to it, a discordant note that betrayed his composure. His eyes found mine, widening with a mixture of shock and anger. "Where have you been? Where are the kids?" he demanded, his voice sharp, betraying his usual facade of control. Resisting the impulse to back away, I stood my ground. "They're safe," I replied evenly. "They're with my father." Marco's gaze darted around, taking in the faces of our colleagues who had formed an ad hoc audience to the unfolding drama. Isabel stepped forward, her presence a shield between the past and my future. "Welcome back, Elena," she declared with a smile, cutting through the tension. "We've all been looking forward to this day." The assembled coworkers erupted into applause, isolating Marco with their camaraderie. He seemed to shrink, a figure diminishing in the light of collective support. Confused yet defiant, he spluttered, "What is this about? Why didn't you tell me you were coming back?" Isabel, with the poise of someone used to handling delicate situations, responded, "Our company is a family, Marco, and when a member of our family is ready to return, we celebrate." A murmur of agreement hummed through the crowd. I watched as understanding dawned upon Marco's face, the implications of my return, the shattering of the narrative he had constructed for himself. "The daycare," he finally stammered. "The children, they must be." I cut him off, my voice steady, my resolve unwavering. "The children are well taken care of, and as for the daycare, we've been fortunate enough to secure spots for both Gabriel and Sophia." Isabel supplemented my words, addressing Marco. "Indeed, they'll be just fine here. We've made certain of that with our new facility." The room buzzed with whispers of commendation and encouragement as Marco realized the breadth of his miscalculation. He had assumed I'd crumble without him, that I'd be forced to compromise. But as the walls he built around me fell away, his own began to close in. "Let's discuss this privately," Marco hissed, reaching for my arm. Resisting his touch, I produced the single item that symbolized the end of our union, a business card from a divorce attorney. His eyes flickered with defeat as I announced, "Please divorce me, Marco." Gasps and whispers filled the room, and I watched as the mask of charm Marco had always worn dissolved into a frown of disbelief. He was silent, searching for words that wouldn't come. Each heartbeat in the silence felt like an eternity, but ultimately it was Isabel's voice that filled the void. "Marco, I think it's time you and the higher-ups had a conversation." Humiliation flared across Marco's face as he backed away, realizing his private indiscretions were far less private than he had believed. As the weight of his deeds crept upon him, he slumped his shoulders, defeated and exposed. I turned away, leaving the broken vase of our marriage behind, and with it the shards of our tarnished past. The flicker of twilight's last stand gave way to night's embrace, as I sat in the quiet comfort of our new rental home, the twins sound asleep in their freshly assembled beds. It was incredible how silence had once been my enemy, filled with the tension of waiting for Marco's critique or outburst. Yet here it was now, a peaceful testament to the change I had courageously enacted. My phone's insistent ringtone splintered the calm. Marco's name flashed on the screen, a vestige of the life I was steadily discarding. With a calming breath I answered, bracing for the storm I knew I had stirred. "Elena, what have you done?" Marco's voice, barely intelligible between sobs and fury, crackled through the speaker. "I've started over, Marco, for myself and for our children," I replied, my voice a beacon in the tumult. He was in disbelief, reeling from the discovery of my actions, the sale of the house, the relocation of our family. The life he had taken for granted, dismantled, sold off to the highest bidder. My heart might have winced at his confusion once, but that empathy had dissolved with every disparaging remark, every angry shout, every tear shed in solitude because of him. Our house, our home, it's empty. Where are Gabriel and Sophia and all our things? He was frantic, grasping at the fragments of control that slipped through his fingers like fine sand. Calmness steadied my response. It's all taken care of, Marco. The children are with my father, and our possessions are here with us in our new place. You sold our house without my consent? Without even telling me? His incredulity suggested betrayal, the irony stinging like salt in a wound. I did what was necessary, Marco. The house was mine before we married. I used my savings for the down payment, remember? I spoke the truth he could not refute, the reality he had ignored in favor of his self-centered narrative. The real estate agent worked with us to find a buyer. It's done. We are moving on. He struggled for words, lost in the labyrinth of his making. When they finally came, they were edged with despair. I thought we were going to discuss this, figure things out. There's nothing left to figure out. It's over, Marco. My finger hovered over the end call button, ready to sever the last of our ties. But where will I go? He pleaded, the mighty Marco reduced to echoes of vulnerability. That's for you to decide. Just know that Gabriel and Sophia will always be cared for, with or without you. The finality of my words seemed to drape over us, a curtain closing on the theater of our farce. I wasted no time after the call, swiftly blocking Marco's number, a line I never thought I'd cross. In the days that followed, legal motions unraveled the entanglements of our failed marriage. Custody, assets, child support. An avalanche of documents and signatures wiped clean the slate, giving rise to my long-awaited freedom. Rumors of his affair saw Marco ousted from his lofty perch, and without the shield of our company's prestige, he eventually resigned. Last I heard, his pride had surrendered to necessity, placing him in a humbler line of work. The whispers of his downfall weaved through the industry like a cautionary tale, a high price paid for hubris and betrayal. Before me lied the blank pages of our lives, ready to be filled with the tales of our choosing. A chapter closed, a book ended, and the narrative was mine to write anew. The morning sun painted hues of gold and amber across the sky, casting a warm glow over the breakfast table where Gabriel and Sophia munched on their cereal with eagerness which only children possess. The atmosphere was serene, a stark contrast to the vortex of recent events. As we sat around the table, my father, the twins, and I formed a new picture, a frame of family redefined by solidarity and love. Those early days of our new life felt like living in a dream, one where I half expected to wake to the sound of Marco's voice demanding an explanation, but that never happened. The twins adapted with the resilience of youth, and over time, peace became our new normal. The transition back into work was smooth, even liberating. Colleagues who had once pitied me now greeted me with respect. My input was once again valued, my insights sought after, and my presence acknowledged. Isabel had checked in often, ensuring that the integration was seamless and that I settled into the rhythm easily. The on-site daycare was a godsend, offering not just convenience but a level of care and attention that left me reassured during the workday. As the days eased into weeks and the weeks meshed into months, we settled into a comfortable routine. Life without Marco's overbearing presence transformed from an initial breath-holding suspense into a deep, gratifying exhale. The fear of his volatility and the anxiety over our future had dissolved into a renewed sense of purpose and independence. Catherine had been true to her word. The whole office seemed to rally around me. Some came by just to tell me how they admired my strength. Others gently shared their own stories of overcoming difficulties. The solidarity was unexpected but deeply appreciated. Even the higher-ups, who were initially guarded, offered their unofficial nods of approval and encouragement. Of course, there were challenges. The twins, with their boundless energy and ceaseless curiosity, ensured there was never a dull moment. The balance between work, motherhood, and personal growth was a delicate dance, but one I was determined to master. Every step I took with a clarity I had not felt in years. I took my father's advice to remain involved with the community to heart. Being active in local events, meeting neighbors, and contributing to the twins' daycare activities provided a sense of belonging. In the shared experiences of parenting and bits of leisurely chats by the playground, I found companionship and a thread of connection weaving into the fabric of our new lives. Gabriel and Sophia burgeoned in this new environment, their laughter a confirmation that leaving Marco had been the right decision. When they hugged me tightly with tiny arms that promised eternity, I knew we had a bright future ahead. All things considered, the upheaval had led to a life more vibrant and fulfilling than I dared to imagine when trapped beneath Marco's shadow. My parents had instilled in me the values of strength, optimism, and resilience, qualities I aimed to pass on to my children. Looking ahead, I saw more than just a flickering light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. I saw brilliant sunshine painting our path forward. As I turned the key in the door of our new home, it was more than just an entranceway. It was a gateway to the promise of tomorrow. And with one last glance back at the road traveled and the traces of the struggle behind us, I stepped through with my head held high, ready for whatever awaited us on the other side. The morning sun glared through the windshield, reflecting off my white gown as we drove towards the wedding venue. Daniel and I had been planning this day for months, and the excitement bubbled inside me. I, Leah, a 32-year-old nurse, was about to marry the man I thought was my soulmate. "Leah, isn't it beautiful today? Perfect for our wedding," Daniel said, his voice calm and reassuring. I smiled, nodding in agreement, feeling the weight of my engagement ring against my finger. Suddenly, Daniel's eyes fixed on something outside the car. His expression changed from serene to intense in a matter of seconds. "That's Rachel," he muttered under his breath. Rachel, his ex-girlfriend, was walking along the sidewalk, struggling with a heavy bag. "What?" I asked, confused. "Why does that matter?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he slammed on the brakes, jolting me forward. "Leah, get out," he said abruptly. I was taken aback. "What? Why? I need to help her. She's struggling. Just get out now." His tone was sharp, brooking no argument. "But, Daniel, it's our wedding day. Can't we just call someone to help her?" "No time. Just get out." Daniel's voice rose, his eyes not leaving Rachel. I felt a mix of anger, confusion, and disbelief. Slowly, I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out of the car. The door slammed shut behind me, and Daniel drove off, leaving me standing there in my wedding dress, out, alone and bewildered. Tears welled up in my eyes. This was not how I imagined my wedding day. The sight of Daniel's car disappearing around the corner, chasing after his past, shattered something inside me. I felt a cold, sinking feeling in my stomach. Had I misjudged the man I was about to marry? Standing on the sidewalk, I realized I had no phone, no wallet, nothing. I was completely stranded. The wedding venue was a 15-minute drive away. I had no choice but to start walking. As I trudged along the road, my mind raced. How had things come to this? Daniel, the charming, attentive man I had fallen in love with, had just abandoned me on our wedding day for his ex-girlfriend. The man who had once listened to my every worry, who had comforted me after long shifts at the hospital, now seemed like a stranger. Every step felt heavier than the last. My mind kept replaying the moment Daniel told me to get out of the car. It didn't make sense. Why would he do this? Was there something between him and Rachel that I didn't know about? By the time I reached the venue, my feet ached and my heart felt even worse. I was a bride without a groom, walking into what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, now clouded with doubt and betrayal. I entered the venue, trying to compose myself. The staff rushed towards me, concern etched on their faces. "Miss Leah, are you okay? Where's Mr. Daniel?" Taking a deep breath, I replied, "I don't know. He left me on the way here." My voice cracked as I spoke. Just then I saw Daniel walking towards me, his face a mixture of guilt and confusion. "Leah, I'm so sorry. I just thought—" "Thought what, Daniel?" I interrupted, my voice cold. "That leaving your bride on the sidewalk on our wedding day was a good idea?" Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The realization of what he had done was finally dawning on him. The Daniel one knew, the one who was always so sure of himself, now looked lost and defeated. But it was too late. The damage was done. I turned away from him, my heart heavy with a decision I never thought I'd have to make. In the sanctuary of my small dressing room, the weight of the veil felt like a shroud of disillusionment. The reflection in the mirror showed a bride, yet the sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. The betrayal of the morning's events gnawed at me, unraveling memories of how Daniel and I had come to this fractured moment. Our story began 2 years ago, under much simpler circumstances. I was introduced to Daniel at a small gathering by mutual friends. He was charming, his laughter infectious, and his interest in my nursing career genuine, or so I had thought. As our relationship progressed, so did the subtleties of Daniel's control. Compliments about my dedication to nursing soon turned into thinly veiled comments about the time it took away from him. "I just miss you, that's all," he'd say, but the implication was clear. His needs should come first. I remembered the evening he first showed his disdain for my job. We were having dinner, and I was excitedly sharing a breakthrough with a patient. Instead of sharing my enthusiasm, he coldly remarked, "Isn't that a bit too much effort for someone who's not even family? You should focus more on what's at home." Those words stung, but I brushed them off, attributing them to stress from his own work. I convinced myself that Daniel's increasingly possessive behavior was just his way of showing love. But as I sat in my wedding dress, abandoned on our wedding day, those excuses crumbled. The turning point came 6 months before our wedding. During a heated argument about our future, Daniel had blurted out, "Maybe you should just quit your job after we're married. Wouldn't you prefer to be a good wife and take care of our home?" I was aghast. "Quit my job? But I love nursing. It's not just a job for me, it's a calling." Daniel scoffed. "A calling? Come on, Leah. It's not like you're saving the world. A wife's place is at home, supporting her husband." That night, I lay awake, wrestling with doubts and Daniel's antiquated views. However, my love for him, blinded by the hope that love could conquer all, led me to dismiss these red flags. The morning of our wedding, those ignored warnings came back to haunt me. As I stood alone in the dressing room, the reality of who Daniel truly was became painfully clear. The man who had vowed to love and protect me had left me on the side of the road for another woman. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was my best friend, Sarah. Her eyes were full of concern. "Leah, are you okay? What happened?" I recounted the morning's events, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah listened, her expression turning from shock to anger. "That's unforgivable, Leah. You deserve so much better than him," Sarah said, her voice firm. "But I love him," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "Love doesn't leave you stranded on the road on your wedding day," Sarah retorted. "You need to think about what's best for you, not him." Her words echoed in my mind as I looked at my reflection again. The bride in the mirror was strong, independent, and deserved respect. Respect that Daniel had failed to give. In that moment, a resolve began to form within me. Daniel's actions today were a clear sign. I couldn't marry a man who saw me as less than an equal, as nothing more than an accessory to his life. Emerging from the dressing room, I found Daniel pacing anxiously in the hallway. He looked up, his face a mask of regret. "Leah, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. Please, can we just forget this happened and move on?" Forgetting was not an option. I squared my shoulders, meeting his gaze with newfound determination. "No, Daniel, we can't just move on. What you did today, it opened my eyes. I can't marry someone who doesn't respect me or my passions." Daniel's face fell, a mix of shock and disbelief washing over him. "But Leah, I love you." "This was just a mistake." "A mistake that showed your true colors," I said, my voice steady. "I deserve someone who supports me, not someone who leaves me on the side of the road for an ex." Turning away from him, I left Daniel standing there, his pleas fading behind me. The decision was painful, but necessary. I would not be a bride today, but I would walk out of this venue with my head held high, ready to face a future where I was valued and respected. The days following the broken wedding were a whirlwind of emotions and hard decisions. It was during a small, tense gathering at my home, with both our families present, that the true extent of Daniel's character began to unravel further. As we sat around the living room, the air was thick with unspoken words and disappointment. My mother, always my pillar of strength, broke the silence. "Leah, we support whatever decision you make, but are you sure you want to end things this way?" Before I could respond, Daniel, who had been quietly brooding, spoke up. "Leah's just overreacting. We can sort this out. It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I echoed, my voice laced with incredulity. "You left me on the side of the road on our wedding day, Daniel." Daniel's mother, a stern woman who had always been cordial to me, turned to her son with a frown. Daniel, that was inexcusable. You need to make amends. Daniel rolled his eyes, a dismissive gesture that sent a wave of anger through me. I already said I was sorry. What more do you want? I felt my hands clench into fists. His lack of remorse and understanding was infuriating. Sorry doesn't just erase what you did, Daniel. It's not just about today, it's about everything leading up to it. My father, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Leah, we just want you to be happy and respected. If Daniel can't give you that, then maybe it's best to part ways. Daniel scoffed, his arrogance on full display. Oh, please. This is all just being blown out of proportion. Leah knows I'm the best she'll ever have. She's not going to leave me. His words struck a nerve, and I felt a surge of defiance rise within me. The best I'll ever have? Daniel, you've done nothing but belittle my career and my choices. You don't respect me as your partner. Daniel's father, a quiet man, finally interjected. Son, you need to realize the gravity of your actions. You can't treat Leah, or any woman, like this. But Daniel was unrepentant. I don't see why everyone's making such a big deal out of this. Leah, you're just too sensitive. You should be grateful that I'm willing to overlook this and still marry you. The room fell silent, the audacity of his words hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. My mother's gaze hardened. Leah is not the one who should be grateful, Daniel. She's a strong, independent woman who deserves someone who truly values her. It was then that I realized the full extent of Daniel's narcissism and disrespect. He saw me not as a partner, but as a possession, something to control and belittle. Daniel, this isn't just about today, it's about how you've treated me all along, I said firmly. I don't need someone who sees me as less than they are. I need a partner who respects and supports me. Daniel's face contorted with anger. Fine. If that's what you want, then we're done. But don't come crawling back to me when you realize your mistake. I looked at him, the man I had once loved, and felt nothing but disappointment and resolve. There's no mistake here, Daniel. The only mistake was thinking you could change. As he stormed out of the room, his family in tow, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. The wedding, the relationship, all of it. I had made my choice, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew it was the right one. In the aftermath of our failed wedding and the tumultuous confrontation with our families, I expected Daniel to retreat, to maybe even show a hint of remorse. Instead, he doubled down, his true nature unraveling in the most public and humiliating way. The day that should have been our wedding turned into a spectacle that I could never have anticipated. I had decided to go through with the reception, not as a celebration of marriage, but as a gathering of friends and family to thank them for their support. But Daniel had other plans. As I mingled with the guests, trying to maintain a semblance of composure, Daniel burst into the venue. His arrival was like a storm, chaotic and unsettling. His eyes, once warm, now bore into me with a strange mix of anger and desperation. Leah, we need to talk, now, he demanded, grabbing my arm with a force that made me wince. I pulled away, my voice steady despite my racing heart. There's nothing left to talk about, Daniel. But he was relentless. You can't just end things like this. We're meant to be together. His words drew the attention of the guests, their murmurs growing louder. I could feel their eyes on us, a mix of pity and curiosity. Daniel, you left me on our wedding day. You humiliated me. There's no coming back from that, I said, my voice rising. He scoffed. Oh, come on, Leah. You're overreacting. You know I only did that because I care about you. I wanted to make sure Rachel was okay. The mention of Rachel's name sparked whispers among the guests. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. You care about me? I countered. Is that why you compared me to Rachel, belittled my career, and demanded I quit my job? Daniel's face twisted into a sneer. You're just too sensitive. You need to learn your place, Leah. My place. Those words echoed in my mind, fueling a fire I hadn't known I possessed. My place is not with someone who doesn't respect me, I retorted. I don't need you, Daniel. I never did. His expression shifted from arrogance to something uglier, a mix of rage and wounded pride. Fine. But you'll regret this, Leah. You'll never find someone like me. I looked at him, seeing him for the petty, insecure man he was. That's the point, Daniel. I don't want someone like you. I deserve better. With that, I turned my back to him, leaving him standing in the middle of the room, his anger palpable. The guests parted for me, their expressions a mix of respect and sympathy. As I walked away, I heard Daniel's voice, shrill and desperate, calling after me. But I didn't look back. I had closed that chapter of my life, ready to start anew, free from his toxic presence. That day, I not only walked away from a broken wedding, but also from a relationship that had been suffocating me. I walked away with my head held high, my dignity intact, and a heart ready to heal and find true respect and love. In the weeks following the debacle of what should have been my wedding day, I found solace in routine, immersing myself in work and the comfort of friends and family. However, Daniel was not content to fade into the background of my newfound tranquility. It began with unexpected, unnerving encounters. I would often find Daniel waiting outside my workplace, his presence a stark reminder of the control he once wielded over my life. Each time, I firmly told him to leave, but my words seemed to fuel his determination. One evening, as I left the hospital, Daniel confronted me again. His usual arrogance was replaced by a desperation that bordered on mania. "Leah, you can't do this to me. We're meant to be together," he pleaded, blocking my path. I stopped, my patience wearing thin. "Daniel, it's over. You need to accept that and move on." He shook his head, his eyes wild. "No, I won't let you ruin this. We were perfect together. You're just confused." His insistence was unsettling, and I took a step back. "I'm not confused, Daniel. I'm clearer now than I've ever been. We're done." As I tried to move past him, Daniel grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You're not going anywhere. You're mine, Leah." That was the last straw. I pulled away forcefully, my voice loud and clear. "I am not your property, Daniel. I never was. Let go of me now, or I'll call the police." The threat seemed to penetrate his delusion, and he released me, his expression one of shock and anger. "You'll regret this, Leah. You'll see." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked away, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I wouldn't be intimidated or swayed by his threats. True to my word, I reported Daniel's behavior to the police. They took my statement and assured me they would handle it. A sense of empowerment washed over me. I was no longer the woman who would tolerate Daniel's manipulation and disrespect. The next I heard of Daniel was through mutual acquaintances. His obsession with winning me back had cost him. His professional reputation had taken a hit, with colleagues and clients alike distancing themselves from his increasingly erratic behavior. But the real downfall came when news broke that Daniel had been fired from his job. His conduct, once excused as high-strung ambition, was now seen for what it was, a series of aggressive and unprofessional outbursts. As I heard these stories, a part of me felt vindicated. Daniel, who had always prided himself on his control and status, was now unraveling, his true nature exposed for all to see. It was a harsh lesson in humility and respect, one that he had brought upon himself. In a strange way, his downfall was the closure I needed. I had moved on, my life a testament to my resilience and strength. Daniel's descent was a stark reminder of the bullet I had dodged, a life of control and belittlement I had bravely walked away from. I no longer felt anger or sadness when I thought of Daniel. Instead, there was a sense of pity for a man who had lost himself in his own arrogance and a profound gratitude for the freedom and respect I now embraced in my life. Months had passed since the day I decided to turn a page in my life, leaving behind the shadow of a relationship that was more a prison than a partnership. The echoes of Daniel's downfall served as a distant reminder of a path I had narrowly escaped. But life, as it always does, moved forward, and so did I. I found myself in a new town, a fresh start, where whispers of my past were just that, whispers, irrelevant and fading. My days were filled with the fulfilling challenges of my nursing career and the simple joys of newfound freedom. I had grown, not just in strength, but in my understanding of what I truly deserved. It was on a bright Saturday morning, in the quaint local market of my new town, that fate decided to bring a semblance of closure to my story. I was perusing fresh produce when a familiar figure caught my eye. Rachel, Daniel's ex-girlfriend, the unintentional catalyst of my wedding day disaster, was there, browsing not too far from me. Our eyes met, and there was a moment of mutual recognition, followed by a hesitant approach. "Leah," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of surprise and something akin to empathy. "Rachel," I replied, the name feeling strange yet familiar on my tongue. "I heard about, well, everything. she said, her gaze kind. I'm so sorry for the part I played in it, however unintentional. I shook my head slightly, a small smile on my lips. You have nothing to apologize for. If anything, you helped me see the truth. Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. Daniel is a complex person. I've had my fair share of troubles with him. I raised an eyebrow, curious despite myself. Troubles? She sighed, a weary look crossing her face. After your wedding day, he wouldn't leave me alone. Kept insisting we were meant to be together. I had to get a restraining order. The news didn't surprise me, but it did bring a sense of finality. Daniel, in his obsession, had spiraled down a path of self-destruction. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Rachel shrugged, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. It's over now. He finally got the message, or at least I hope he did. I'm just trying to move on. Moving on is the best we can do, I said, feeling a kinship with this woman I once saw as a rival. We chatted for a bit longer, exchanging stories of moving forward and the lessons learned from our encounters with Daniel. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of peace. Walking away from the market, I realized that this chance meeting was more than just a coincidence. It was a reminder of how far I had come, of the strength I had found in myself to overcome adversity and disrespect. My steps were light as I made my way home. The burden of the past finally lifted. I had survived, thrived even, and in doing so had found a deeper appreciation for my own worth. Daniel's chapter in my life was closed, a distant, fading memory. Ahead of me lay a path of my own making, filled with possibilities, and the promise of a future where respect and love were not just desired, but demanded. In that moment, I knew that the best revenge was not in the downfall of the one who wronged me, but in the life I would build, free from his shadow. A life where I was the author of my own story, strong, respected, and unapologetically me. My name is Eleanor, and by all outward appearances, my life is the epitome of success. As the CEO of a thriving company, I've earned respect and admiration in my field. 2 years ago, I married David, a man who seemed to complement my ambitions and lifestyle perfectly. We don't have children, but our busy careers fill our lives, often spilling into weekends. Our rare time together is cherished, usually spent on yearly overseas trips, our escape from the perpetual hustle. Our home, a luxurious condo on an upper floor of a Bay Area tower, stands as a testament to our aspirations. It was a stretch to afford, but we saw it as a valuable asset for our future. Every inch of our home reflects the life we've built, spacious, modern, and high above the city's clamor. Rachel, my friend since high school, is one of the few I share my personal life with. Beautiful and ambitious, Rachel has always had her eyes set on a particular type of man, well-educated, high-earning, the epitome of success. Her unwavering standards have kept her single, but she remains hopeful, continually searching for her ideal match through dating apps. Our friendship, born in the classrooms of high school and strengthened through shared university experiences, has been a constant in my life. We've shared laughter and tears, triumphs and disappointments. Since my marriage, however, our meetings have become infrequent, our lives diverging onto different paths. One sunny afternoon, as we enjoyed lunch at a quaint cafe near the park, Rachel's casual question caught me off guard. "Eleanor, can I visit your condo next time?" she asked. She had never seen my home, and her sudden interest piqued my curiosity. The following weekend, Rachel visited. Her reaction upon entering was one of awe. "This place is like a mansion," she exclaimed, her eyes scanning every corner of my carefully curated home. "It must have cost a fortune." I nodded, affirming her guess. "It's $1 million condominium," I said, pride lacing my words. Her fascination was evident, especially when she learned of David's substantial income. But there was something in her reaction, a gleam in her eye, that unsettled me. I shrugged it off as mere admiration. Our afternoon progressed pleasantly enough, with tea and cookies. Rachel's request to stay till evening to greet David seemed harmless enough. He agreed happily, looking forward to a relaxed evening at home. I busied myself with dinner preparations, occasionally noticing Rachel's frequent trips to the bathroom, but thought little of it. Then, a moment of dissonance. Rachel returned from one such trip wearing my necklace, a piece I treasured and had intended as a gift for David. Her flippant request to borrow it for a date was startling, but I agreed, not wanting to create a rift over a piece of jewelry. Yet, as the evening drew to a close, with Rachel finally leaving, I couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. A quick inspection of my bedroom confirmed my fears. Drawers slightly ajar, items subtly displaced. Rachel had explored far more than just the living spaces of my home. The evening ended with an awkward warmth as David and Rachel exchanged pleasantries, laughing over shared stories. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, one that would soon upend the life I had so carefully constructed. The morning after Rachel's visit, the condo felt different, as if her presence had left an invisible mark. I tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to my overthinking. As I prepared for the day, I noticed small changes. A misplaced item here, a shifted ornament there. Rachel's curiosity had clearly extended beyond polite boundaries. Over the following weeks, David's behavior began to subtly shift. He was more absorbed in his phone, often distracted and distant. Our conversations, once filled with shared plans and laughter, dwindled into monosyllabic exchanges. He carried his phone everywhere, a sudden change from his usual casual attitude towards it. Our home, once a sanctuary of love and companionship, started to feel like a quiet battleground of unspoken tensions. David's increased workload, or so he claimed, meant more weekends spent at the office. The gap between us widened, leaving me in a house that felt increasingly empty. One evening, as I sorted through some documents in the living room, I stumbled upon something unexpected and chilling: divorce papers. David's signature was already there, stark and final. My heart raced and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The papers felt heavy in my hands, a tangible confirmation of the growing rift between us. I confronted David over the phone. His response was blunt and emotionless. "I've fallen in love with someone else," he said, his words slicing through the last thread of hope I held for our marriage. The background noise on his end of the call revealed another presence, a female voice I recognized immediately. Rachel. Her words were like daggers. "I'm dating David. We're serious." The callousness in her tone was something I had never heard before. It dawned on me that the friend I had trusted was now the architect of my marital collapse. In the days that followed, I was engulfed in a fog of betrayal and disbelief. David never returned home, and I couldn't bring myself to touch the divorce papers that lay accusingly on the table. To add to my torment, Rachel began sending me photos. Her and David, smiling, laughing, blatantly flaunting their relationship. Each image was a calculated strike, designed to deepen the wound she had so callously inflicted. I struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy. My work suffered, my social interactions became strained, and sleep eluded me. Concerned friends and colleagues urged me to seek professional help. Reluctantly, I agreed, and the medication prescribed brought a measure of relief, allowing me to sleep and function at a basic level. Then one day I returned home to find signs of intrusion. My bedroom had been ransacked. Jewelry, bags, watches, many of my valuables were missing. There was no doubt in my mind who was responsible. The theft was more than just a material loss. It was a violation of my sanctuary, a place that once represented safety and love. My insomnia returned, more severe than before. The nights were long and torturous, filled with a mix of rage and despair. Friends and therapists alike encouraged me to take legal action, and finally I relented. It was time to face the situation head-on. In the wake of the discovery and theft, my world felt like it was crumbling. The walls of the condo, once symbols of success and security, now seemed to mock me with their silent, unchanging presence. I had to act, not just for the sake of my peace of mind, but for my dignity. I reached out to a lawyer, seeking guidance on how to navigate the legal complexities of divorce and theft. The lawyer, a seasoned professional with a keen understanding of such matters, listened intently as I recounted the events that had led me to his office. "We need to approach this methodically," he advised, outlining a plan that began with filing for divorce and reporting the theft. His calm demeanor and systematic approach provided a semblance of stability in the chaos that my life had become. Armed with legal support, I found the strength to confront David. I sent him a certified letter, formally notifying him of my intent to divorce and the legal actions I was taking. His response was cold and detached, a sharp contrast to the man I had married. As the legal proceedings began to take shape, I found myself oscillating between a sense of empowerment and overwhelming grief. The process was cathartic, but also painfully revealing. It became increasingly clear that the man I had loved and the life we had built together were nothing more than a facade. Rachel's response to the situation was equally telling. She called me furious about the certified letter I had sent to her workplace. Her anger only fueled my resolve. "You should have expected this," I told her firmly, ending the call. The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations, sleepless nights, and emotional turmoil. Yet, amidst the chaos, a plan began to form in my mind. I needed to confront them both, not just for closure but for a sense of justice. With my lawyer's assistance, a meeting was arranged at his office. I prepared myself mentally and emotionally to face David and Rachel, to look them in the eye and reclaim my narrative. The day of the meeting arrived with a heavy air of anticipation. Rachel entered the office first, her anger palpable. David followed, a shadow of the confident man he once was. "We'll conduct this meeting with civility," my lawyer stated firmly, setting the tone. He began by addressing the divorce, clarifying the terms and conditions. The mention of alimony brought a visible change in David's demeanor, a mixture of surprise and resignation. I watched them, Rachel with her false bravado and David defeated and remorseful. It was a stark reminder of the consequences of deceit and betrayal. As the meeting progressed, I found my voice addressing them both with a calm, assertive tone. "This is the result of your choices," I said, my words cutting through the tension in the room. The meeting ended with a clear understanding of the legal repercussions they both faced. I left the office with a sense of closure, knowing that while the emotional scars would take time to heal, I had taken the first step towards rebuilding my life. In the aftermath of the meeting, I found myself in a whirlwind of emotions. The confrontation with David and Rachel had been intense, a clash of truths and betrayals. It was over, but the echoes of their words lingered, haunting the quiet moments of my days. I returned to the empty condo, its walls now echoing the silence of my solitary existence. The place that once resonated with shared dreams and laughter felt hollow, a stark reminder of the betrayal that had unfolded within its confines. As I tried to piece together my fractured life, the reality of the situation became increasingly clear. David had not just betrayed our marriage vows, he had shattered the trust that was the foundation of our relationship. Rachel, the friend I'd confided in and trusted, had turned out to be the orchestrator of my heartbreak. The images Rachel sent flaunting her relationship with David were a deliberate attempt to provoke and hurt me. Each photo was a knife twisting in an already gaping wound. But amid the turmoil, a resolve began to form within me. I refused to be a victim of their callousness. I took solace in my work, pouring my energy into the company that had been my passion for years. The familiar routines and challenges of the business world provided a welcome distraction from the emotional chaos. My lawyer, a steadfast ally in this tumultuous journey, handled the legalities with precision and empathy. He updated me regularly, ensuring that I was informed and involved in every step of the process. As the divorce proceedings progressed, I gradually began to reclaim pieces of my life. I reconnected with old friends, explored new hobbies, and rediscovered parts of myself that had been overshadowed by my marriage. Sleep, once elusive, gradually returned, bringing a semblance of normalcy. The medication and therapy sessions helped, but it was the inner strength and resilience I found within myself that truly made the difference. The nights were still long, and the heartache lingered, but there was a newfound sense of hope. I realized that this ordeal, as painful as it was, had given me a chance to start anew, to build a life that was truly mine. I decided to redecorate the condo, transforming it into a space that reflected my tastes and preferences. With each change, the memories of David and Rachel faded, replaced by a sense of ownership and self-expression. The journey was far from easy, but with each passing day I felt stronger, more in control of my destiny. The betrayal had exposed the harsh realities of my life, but it had also opened the door to new beginnings. The legal process, though necessary, was a labyrinth of emotions and decisions. Each step, from filing the police report for the theft to attending the divorce hearings, was a reminder of the betrayal that had upended my life. Yet, with each legal document and court appearance, I found a piece of myself being restored, my dignity, my independence, my strength. My lawyer was a pillar of support during this time. His expertise and guidance through the legal intricacies provided a sense of security amidst the chaos. The divorce proceedings were straightforward, given the evidence of adultery and betrayal. However, it was the issue of the theft that brought a new level of complexity. I had to recount the details of that day, Rachel's visit, her unusual interest in my belongings, and the subsequent discovery of the missing items. The police were methodical in their investigation, and my lawyer ensured that every legal avenue was pursued. As the case unfolded, the depth of Rachel's deceit became increasingly apparent. It wasn't just a one-time act of theft. It was a calculated betrayal that spanned the entirety of our friendship. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, but it also fueled my resolve to see justice served. Meanwhile, the once lively condo continued to feel empty and vast, a constant reminder of the life I once shared with David. I started to consider selling it, the idea of a fresh start in a new place becoming more appealing. The divorce was finalized with a sense of quiet resignation. David's admission of the affair and his acceptance of the consequences brought a formal end to our marriage. There was no dramatic showdown, no explosive confrontation, just the somber reality of a relationship that had irrevocably broken. As part of the settlement, I received a significant portion of our shared assets, a fact that would have pleased me once, but now felt like a hollow victory. The money couldn't compensate for the trust that was broken or the time that was lost. The theft case against Rachel was building momentum. The evidence was undeniable, and her attempts to deflect and deny only added to the strength of the case against her. The thought of her facing legal consequences for her actions brought a sense of grim satisfaction. Despite the legal battles and emotional upheaval, I found moments of peace. I rediscovered my love for painting, a hobby I had neglected for years. Each stroke of the brush was therapeutic, a way to express the myriad of emotions that words couldn't capture. My nights were no longer plagued by the haunting images of betrayal. Instead, they were filled with plans for the future, dreams of what lay ahead. The path to healing was long and winding, but I was on it, one step at a time. The closure of the legal proceedings marked the end of a tumultuous chapter in my life. The courtroom, once a place of anxiety and confrontation, became the setting where illusions were finally shattered and truths laid bare. Rachel's trial for the theft was a sobering affair. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her initial bravado crumbled under the weight of reality. The court found her guilty, and she was sentenced accordingly. Watching her being held accountable for her actions brought a sense of justice, albeit a bitter one. David, on the other hand, faced his own set of consequences. His affair with Rachel had not only ended our marriage, but also tarnished his reputation. His once promising career took a hit, and the man who once stood beside me with confidence was now grappling with the fallout of his choices. As for me, the conclusion of these legal battles was both liberating and daunting. I was free from the shackles of a broken marriage and the betrayal of a friend, but I also faced the reality of starting over. The condo, once a symbol of my married life, felt too large, too empty. I made the decision to sell it, seeking a fresh start elsewhere. In the midst of these changes, I found solace in my work. My company, which had been a constant through the ups and downs, provided a sense of purpose and direction. I poured my energy into new projects, finding that with each success a piece of my old self was restored. It was during this period of rebuilding that I reconnected with an old college friend, James. Our rekindled friendship brought unexpected comfort and companionship. James, having gone through a difficult divorce himself, understood the complexities of my emotions and offered support without judgment. With time, the wounds began to heal. The sleepless nights and heartache gave way to a newfound sense of peace and self-assurance. I started to enjoy the simple pleasures of life again: a quiet evening at home, a good book, the company of friends. I also rediscovered my passion for travel. A solo trip to Europe, initially daunting, turned out to be a journey of self-discovery. Walking the streets of Paris, exploring the art and culture, I felt a connection to a part of myself that I had long neglected. The trip was not just an escape, but a revelation. It reminded me of the vastness of the world and the endless possibilities it held. I returned home with a renewed spirit, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The end of my marriage to David and the betrayal by Rachel were painful chapters in my life, but they were not the end of my story. They were, in fact, the beginning of a new journey. One where I was the author of my own destiny. The sale of the condo marked a significant turning point. It was more than just a change of residence. It symbolized the shedding of my old life and the beginning of a new chapter. I moved into a smaller, cozier place, one that felt more like me and less like the life I had shared with David. Professionally, my company was thriving. The challenges of the past year had honed my leadership skills, and I found myself making bolder, more confident decisions. We expanded our reach, venturing into new markets and exploring innovative ideas. The success was gratifying, a testament to my resilience and determination. During this period of growth and change, James became a steady presence in my life. Our friendship evolved naturally, filled with deep conversations, shared interests, and a mutual understanding of each other's past hardships. His support was unwavering, a contrast to the instability I had experienced with David. It was on a business trip to Europe that an unexpected opportunity presented itself. In a quaint jewelry store in Paris, I met Alexandra, the charming and insightful owner. Our shared passion for jewelry design led to animated discussions, and I found myself drawn to his perspective on art and life. This encounter led to a collaboration, with my company's jewelry being showcased in his store. It was a significant milestone, both professionally and personally. Alexandra and I developed a close bond, one that was built on mutual respect and shared experiences. He, too, had endured the pain of divorce, and our conversations often veered into the realms of healing and personal growth. Back home, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The pain of the past receded, leaving behind lessons and a newfound appreciation for the present. I reconnected with old hobbies, took up new interests, and surrounded myself with people who brought positivity into my life. The journey wasn't without its moments of reflection and sadness, but these emotions no longer overwhelmed me. Instead, they were reminders of how far I had come and the strength I had found within myself. As I look back on the tumultuous events that reshaped my life, I realized that they were catalysts for a profound transformation. From the ashes of betrayal and loss, I rose, stronger and more self-assured. I had not only survived, I had thrived. Now, as I plan my next trip to Paris, not just for business but also to see Alexandra, I do so with a heart full of hope. The future is unwritten, and for the first time in a long time that excites me. My story, once marred by deception and heartache, is now a narrative of resilience, growth, and the power of new beginnings. I lay on the cold kitchen floor, my hand clutched to my side where waves of sharp pain were radiating through my body. It felt like a knife twisting inside me. My 7-year-old daughter, Lily, stood nearby, her small face etched with fear. "Mommy, are you okay?" Lily's voice quivered, barely above a whisper. I tried to sound reassuring, despite the agony. "I'll be fine, honey. Just a bad stomach ache," I lied, attempting to mask the severity of my pain. Footsteps echoed through the hallway as my husband, David, appeared in the doorway. His expression was one of annoyance rather than concern. He was all set for his trip, suitcase in hand. "What's going on, Evelyn? Why are you on the floor?" David asked, his voice tinged with irritation. "I think it's appendicitis, David. It's really bad. We need to go to the hospital." I managed to gasp out, each word punctuated by pain. He scoffed at me. "Appendicitis? You're probably overreacting. It's likely just indigestion." "But David, I really think—" My words were cut off by a sharp jolt of pain, causing me to wince. David checked his watch, his impatience palpable. "I can't miss this trip with Rachel. Just call a taxi or something." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "David, I can't even move. Lily's here. I need you," I pleaded, my voice laced with desperation. He shook his head, unmoved. "I'm sure it's nothing. Call if it gets worse." And with that, he left, his suitcase trailing behind him. I was left alone, in pain, with Lily. Lily's small hands found mine, her tears mirroring my own. "Mommy, don't be sick. You have to be okay." I gathered what little strength I had, pulling Lily close. "I'm here, darling. Mommy's here." With David out of the picture, I knew I had to take action. Shaking hands fumbled for my phone, and I dialed the only person I knew I could count on, My brother Michael. The phone rang, its sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. Hello? Michael's voice was a beacon of hope. Michael, it's Evelyn. I need help. I think it's appendicitis. I can't move and Lily is frightened, I said, each word a struggle. There was a brief, stunned silence, then Michael's voice, steady and strong. I'm coming right now. Hold on, Evelyn. I'll be there as soon as I can. Leaning back against the cold tile, I closed my eyes, trying to keep the pain at bay. Lily cuddled up to me, her presence a small comfort. In that moment, a resolve formed within me. David's abandonment in my time of need would not be forgotten. It was a deep cut, a betrayal that marked the beginning of a change. As I waited for Michael, one thing was clear. Things would never be the same. I was going to make sure of it. As I lay in the hospital bed, the sterile white walls and the soft beeps of the machines around me felt strangely comforting. The surgery for my appendicitis had been a success, but the emotional wound left by David's abandonment was still raw. I had managed to call my parents to take care of Lily while I recovered, their voices filled with concern and unspoken questions about David's absence. 3 days later, I was back home, the physical pain a dull reminder of the recent ordeal. Lily, her face brightening at my return, ran into my arms. Mommy, you're back. Are you all better now? Her innocent question tugged at my heart. I'm getting there, sweetie, I replied, hugging her tightly, grateful for her presence. The calmness of our reunion was shattered the next day by the sound of the front door banging open. David and his sister Rachel stormed in, their voices raised in frustration. Why didn't you pick us up yesterday? We had to spend extra on a taxi and train fares. David's voice was loud and accusing as he entered the living room. I felt a surge of anger at his audacity. Welcome back. You must have had a tough time, I said coldly, meeting his gaze with a glare. David stopped in his tracks, surprised by my icy reception. Rachel, too, seemed taken aback by the tension in the room. What's with the attitude, Evelyn? David demanded. I couldn't hold back any longer. While you were off enjoying your trip, I was in the hospital, I said, my voice steady but seething with anger. And you, Rachel, always demanding David's time without a thought for his family. Rachel's face reddened, and David looked bewildered. What are you talking about? You were okay, right? He retorted, his tone dismissive. It's not just about being okay, David. It's about being there when your family needs you, I shot back, my frustration boiling over. Before David could respond, the living room door opened, and in walked Michael, our parents, and David's parents. 14 eyes filled with varying degrees of anger and disappointment were fixed on David and Rachel. Why is everyone here? David's voice faltered, his confidence waning under their collective glare. I took a deep breath, channeling my pain and betrayal into words. David, you left me and Lily alone when we needed you the most. I had to be hospitalized, and you weren't there. I've told everything to both our families. David seemed to shrink under the weight of my words, his usual bravado nowhere in sight. His eyes darted around, seeking an ally, but found none. It's not just about this one incident, David. It's about all the times you've put Rachel's needs above your own family, my brother Michael added, his tone laced with disappointment. Rachel, usually so confident, looked uncomfortable, her gaze shifting from the floor to the angry faces around her. David tried to defend himself, his words a mix of excuses and feeble attempts at justification. The confrontation was intense, the air thick with tension. But for me, it was a turning point. I realized that I couldn't continue living in the shadow of David's neglect. It was time for change, time for me to stand up for myself and Lily. The meeting ended with no resolution, but the message was clear. I had the support of both our families, and David's careless facade had been shattered. As they left, David's parents gave me a look of sympathy, a silent acknowledgement of their son's failings. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also a newfound strength. David had shown his true colors, and it was time for me to take control of my life. The days following the confrontation were heavy with unspoken words and tension. David tried to act as if nothing had changed, but the air between us was thick with the unsaid. I spent those days reflecting, realizing the depth of my unhappiness and the need for change. The decision I came to wasn't easy, but it felt necessary, like a breath of fresh air in a long stifled room. One evening, as David sat on the couch, nonchalantly flipping through the TV channels, I walked up to him, a folder in my hand. My heart was pounding, but my resolve was firm. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He glanced up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "What now, Evelyn?" I took a deep breath and handed him the folder. "I want a divorce." David stared at me, his expression a mix of disbelief and mockery. "Divorce? Don't be ridiculous, Evelyn. You're overreacting." I shook my head, feeling a sense of empowerment growing within me. "It's not an overreaction. I've thought about this a lot. You've constantly put Rachel and yourself before me and Lily. I can't live like this anymore." David's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you can manage on your own? Don't be naive, Evelyn." His words were meant to wound, but I stood my ground. "I'm not naive, David. I'm aware of what this means, but I'd rather face that uncertainty than continue feeling invisible in my own marriage." He laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "Good luck, Evelyn. You'll come crawling back once you realize how hard it is out there." I felt my anger rising, but kept my composure. "I won't. This is my decision, and I'm sticking to it." For a moment, David looked like he might argue further, but then he shrugged, an arrogant smirk on his face. "Fine, have it your way. But remember, I warned you." As he turned back to the TV, dismissing me once again, I felt a mix of emotions. There was fear, yes, but also a liberating sense of freedom. I was finally taking control of my life, stepping out of the shadows. The next day, I began the legal proceedings for the divorce. It was a daunting process, filled with paperwork and legalities, but I was determined. My parents and Michael were supportive, offering help and encouragement. During this time, David's true character became even more apparent. He was dismissive and uncooperative, trying to intimidate me into backing down. But I stood firm, bolstered by the support of my family and the growing realization of my own strength. As the days passed, David's facade began to crumble. The charming, confident man I had married was revealed to be selfish and manipulative, his true colors exposed for all to see. The divorce proceedings were tough, but I faced them head-on, each step forward a testament to my newfound resolve. I was no longer the woman who lay on the kitchen floor, ignored and in pain. I was a woman reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her happiness. The divorce was a grueling process, marked by David's attempts to undermine and belittle me at every turn. He would often sneer during our meetings, making snide remarks about my capabilities as a mother and my future without him. But his words, once so debilitating, now only fueled my determination to break free from his toxic grasp. "Enjoy your life of struggle, Evelyn," David taunted during one of our final meetings. "You'll soon realize how good you had it with me." His arrogance was infuriating, but I kept my composure. "I'd rather struggle every day than spend another moment with someone who has so little regard for his family," I retorted, my voice unwavering. David's smug expression faltered for a moment, replaced by a flash of anger. He quickly masked it with a scoff, but I could tell my words had hit their mark. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. I was free from David, but the journey ahead was daunting. Yet, as I walked out of the courthouse, a sense of liberation washed over me. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, David's life began to unravel. His neglectful behavior and the divorce became the talk of his workplace. Colleagues who once admired him now looked at him with a mix of pity and disdain. His charming facade had crumbled, revealing the pettiness and selfishness beneath. Word of our divorce and the reasons behind it spread through our community, thanks largely to my cousin, a well-known figure in our neighborhood. David, who had always prided himself on his image and reputation, found himself the subject of whispered conversations and judgmental glances. Rachel, too, faced her share of backlash. Her interference in our marriage was now public knowledge, and friends and neighbors began to view her with suspicion and disapproval. The bond she once shared with David, unbreakable in her eyes, was now strained and awkward. One evening, while picking up Lily from school, I overheard a heated argument between David and Rachel outside their house. Their voices were laced with blame and resentment. "It's your fault we're in this mess, Rachel," David yelled, his frustration evident. "How dare you blame me? You're the one who couldn't keep your family together." Rachel shot back, her voice high with anger. Their argument was a stark contrast to the united front they once presented. The seeds of discord sown by their actions had finally borne fruit, and they were now reaping the consequences. As I walked away with Lily, I felt a sense of vindication. David and Rachel were finally facing the repercussions of their selfishness. It was a harsh lesson, but one they had brought upon themselves. That night, as Lily slept peacefully in her room, I sat by the window, reflecting on the past few months. The journey had been difficult, but it had led me to a place of strength and self-respect. I had fought for my dignity and for Lily's future, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I felt ready to face it with newfound confidence. In the aftermath of the divorce, life settled into a new rhythm, one that was quieter but more fulfilling. The shackles of my unhappy marriage were gone, and in their place was a newfound sense of independence. I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece with Lily by my side. My first step was to secure a job. The gap in my resume, due to years dedicated to motherhood, was a concern, but I was determined. After several interviews, I landed a position at a small accounting firm. The firm was run by a woman who believed in supporting working mothers, and the environment was understanding and flexible. It was a perfect fit for me. Lily adapted to the changes with the resilience that only children possess. She started kindergarten, her days filled with new friends and learning. Her laughter and chatter filled our home with joy, a stark contrast to the tense silence that had pervaded it before. But the echoes of my past with David were not completely silenced. One afternoon, while dropping Lily off at school, I overheard a group of parents whispering, "That's her, Evelyn." Heard her husband left her because he couldn't stand being around her anymore. Their words stung, but I held my head high. The gossip and judgment were small prices to pay for the freedom and peace I now had. Meanwhile, David's downfall continued. His pride had taken a significant hit, and his once spotless reputation was now tarnished. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he had moved back in with his parents, a fact that he tried to keep hidden but eventually seeped out. Rachel's situation was no better. Her meddling in our marriage had alienated her from many of her friends. The once inseparable siblings were now barely on speaking terms, their relationship strained by blame and regret. As for me, I found solace in the support of my family. My brother, Michael, moved closer to us, and his presence was a constant source of comfort. My parents doted on Lily, their love for her a balm to the wounds of the past. One day, while sipping coffee in my kitchen, I reflected on the journey I had taken. The pain, the struggle, the liberation, it had all led me to this moment of tranquility. I had not only survived, I had emerged stronger, more self-assured. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find David standing there, a look of defeat on his face. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." His apology, though late, was a validation of my decision. "Thank you, David," I said, not unkindly, "but it's too late. I've moved on." As I closed the door on David and the life we once shared, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life that he had been a part of was over, and a new chapter was beginning. A chapter where I was the author of my own story, free to write my future as I saw fit. Lily's voice called out from the living room, bringing a smile to my face. I walked towards her, ready to embrace the life that lay ahead, a life full of possibilities and hope. The clock struck 8 as I, Eleanor, sat at the dining table, sipping my tea in silence. At 55, I prided myself on maintaining a sense of style and grace. My job as a senior editor at a lifestyle magazine wasn't just a career, it was my passion, a part of who I was. Richard, my husband of nearly 30 years, sat across from me, his eyes glued to his phone. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, loaded with years of unspoken resentments and faded love. "I wish you'd just die already," Richard muttered, not looking up from his screen. His words sliced through the quiet room like a sharp knife. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from fear, but from the sheer coldness of his statement. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Richard finally looked up, his expression one of annoyance rather than regret. "You heard me. It's not like you're doing anything valuable, just taking up space." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the man I had married, the man who had once promised to cherish me. Now he wished me dead. Our marriage had become a shadow of what it once was. Richard's outdated beliefs, his insistence that a woman's place was in the home, clashed fiercely with my independence and career ambitions. It wasn't just about us anymore. His mother, Claire, a widowed woman of considerable wealth, had become a point of contention. Richard often spoke of her fortune, eyeing it like a vulture. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice tinged with disgust. "Is this really what our marriage has come to? You wishing me dead?" Richard scoffed. "Marriage? This is a contract of convenience, nothing more. And let's not pretend you're not waiting for Claire to kick the bucket for her money." His accusation was like a slap in the face. Unlike him, I had never seen Claire as a walking bank account. She was a kind, intelligent woman who deserved better than a son waiting for her demise. "You're a monster," I said quietly, standing up from the table. "I don't even know who you are anymore." Richard's laugh was cruel and hollow. "Oh, Eleanor, you never knew me. You were too busy with your precious career." I walked away from the table from Richard, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Not for what we had, but for what we could have had, if only Richard had been the man I thought he was. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of Richard's words pressed down on me. This wasn't just a loveless marriage. It was a battlefield, and I was tired of being the only one fighting for peace. It was time to make a decision, one that would change the course of my life. The first rays of dawn brought a new resolve. I would no longer be a passive participant in this farce of a marriage. Richard had shown his true colors, and it was time for me to show mine. The following weeks were a blur of silent meals and cold stares. Richard's cruelty had unveiled a truth I had long tried to ignore. Our marriage was nothing but a hollow shell. Each evening, Richard would retreat into his world, often whispering into his phone or laughing at texts. The secrecy of his actions raised a red flag in my mind. Was he having an affair? Strangely, the thought didn't hurt as much as I expected. Perhaps it was because my own feelings for him had withered into nothingness. One night, as I lay awake, I heard Richard's muffled voice from the living room. Curiosity overtook me, and I tiptoed to the door, pressing my ear against it. "That old witch, she's just hoarding her wealth," he sneered. "Once she's gone, we'll be set for life." His words were like poison, seeping into my heart. He wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying his own mother. Claire, who had always been kind to us, didn't deserve such a fate. My heart ached for Claire. She was a strong woman, but the thought of her own son wishing her dead was too much to bear. I decided then that I needed to protect her, not just from Richard, but also from the cruel grip of greed. The next day I visited Claire. Her home was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the coldness of my own. We sipped tea, and I watched her, the lines on her face telling stories of a life well lived. "Claire, you know you can always count on me, right?" I said, reaching across the table to hold her hand. "If you ever need anything, I'm here." Claire smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I know, Eleanor, you've always been more of a daughter to me than a daughter-in-law." Her words warmed my heart, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered. I knew I had to act, to somehow shield her from the greed and malice that had consumed Richard. That evening, as I lay in bed, I realized the extent of my isolation. My marriage was a facade, and the man I shared my home with was a stranger driven by selfishness. But amidst the darkness, a plan began to form in my mind, a plan to expose Richard's true intentions and protect Claire from his clutches. I would need to be careful, cunning even. It was time for the hunted to become the hunter. With each passing day, my resolve strengthened. Richard had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. The stage was set for a reckoning, and I was ready to play my part. The days turned into weeks, each one passing with the heavy knowledge of Richard's betrayal. It was during one of these monotonous days that fate took a sharp, unexpected turn. I had just returned from work when I received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was Dr. Harper, Richard's physician. "Mrs. Williams, it's about your husband," Dr. Harper said, his tone grave. "We've found something concerning in his latest tests. It's serious, and we need to discuss it with you." A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. What could be so serious that the doctor needed to talk to me first? I met with Dr. Harper the next day. The hospital's sterile walls and the antiseptic smell did nothing to calm my nerves. Dr. Harper's words were a shockwave that shook me to my core. "Your husband has a terminal condition," he said. "I'm sorry, but he has only about 6 months left." The news hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, Richard was still my husband, the man I had once loved. The thought of him facing death alone was unexpectedly heartbreaking. But then a twisted idea crept into my mind. What if Richard never knew about his diagnosis? The thought was vindictive, petty even, but the seed was planted. I returned home, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Richard was his usual self, dismissive and absorbed in his phone. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Here he was, wishing death upon others, unaware of his own impending doom. "Honey, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Richard barely glanced up. "What now, Eleanor? Can't you see I'm busy?" His indifference fueled my resolve. "It's important," I insisted. With a heavy sigh, he put down his phone. "Fine, what is it?" I took a deep breath. "The doctor called. He said you have 6 months to live." For a moment, Richard just stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. Then a cruel smile twisted his lips. "6 months, huh?" he said, his voice laced with mockery. "Well, isn't that a twist of fate?" His reaction was devoid of fear or sadness. Instead, there was a perverse acceptance, as if he saw it as an opportunity to live without consequences. The following weeks were surreal. Richard began living as if each day was his last, squandering money on lavish items and extravagant nights out. He was like a man possessed, desperate to squeeze a lifetime into 6 months. And through it all, I played the part of the concerned wife, all the while keeping the dark secret that it was he, not I, who was living on borrowed time. As I watched Richard spiral into a reckless abandon, a part of me felt vindicated. This was his karma, a fitting end for a man who had shown nothing but selfishness and cruelty. But another part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, couldn't help but feel a twisted satisfaction in watching him unknowingly live out his last days in a delusion of immortality. It was a cruel game, one that I never imagined I'd play. But in this twisted tale of revenge, I was no longer just a victim. I was the architect of his downfall. As Richard's self-destruction escalated, a new character entered the stage of our twisted drama. It was a chilly evening in late autumn when she appeared at our doorstep, unannounced and unexpected. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with an air of confidence that belied her years. Her name was Annabelle. "May I help you?" I asked, eyeing her cautiously. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Annabelle. I think we need to talk about Richard," she said, her voice steady and composed. The pieces fell into place with a sinking feeling in my stomach. This was the woman Richard was having an affair with. The audacity of her showing up at my house was infuriating, yet I was intrigued by what she had to say. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Let's hear what you have to say." We sat in the living room, an awkward tension hanging in the air. Annabelle was the first to break the silence. "I know about Richard's condition," she began, "and I think it would be best for everyone if you two separated. Richard deserves to spend his last months happy." The suggestion was outrageous. Not only was Annabelle asking me to step aside for her affair, but she also believed the lie that Richard was the one dying. "And why would I do that?" I asked, my voice laced with disdain. "Because it's what Richard wants," she replied, her tone almost pleading. "He's suffering, and staying in this marriage is only making it worse." Her words were like a slap in the face. This woman, this intruder, had the audacity to speak of suffering while she played a part in destroying my marriage. "You speak of suffering," I said, my voice rising. "But what do you know of the years of neglect, the emotional abuse, the utter loneliness of a loveless marriage?" Annabelle's confidence seemed to waver, but she held her ground. "I love him, and I know he loves me too. We plan to be together once it's over." The situation was absurd. Here I was, speaking to my husband's mistress about his fictional terminal illness, a lie that had spiraled out of control. "Annabelle, you're living in a fantasy," I said coldly. "Richard isn't the man you think he is, and this affair, it's just a game to him." She shook her head, a look of disbelief on her face. "No, you're wrong. We have something real." I wanted to laugh, to shout, to tell her the truth about everything, but I held back, a part of me wanting to see how this farce would play out. "Believe what you will," I said, standing up. "But know this, Richard is not a man capable of love. He's a user, a manipulator, and sooner or later you'll see him for what he truly is." Annabelle stood up, her eyes betraying a hint of doubt. "I guess we'll see," she said before turning and walking out. As the door closed behind her, I was left with a sense of emptiness. This game of deception and revenge was taking a toll on me. I was caught in a web of my own making, and with each passing day the lines between right and wrong blurred a little more. But there was no turning back now. The stage was set, the players in place. All that was left was to see this twisted drama to its bitter end. The days following Annabelle's visit were a twisted dance of deception and revelation. Richard's extravagant lifestyle reached new heights, and his nights out became more frequent. It was as if he was trying to outrun the clock, to squeeze every last drop of life from his remaining days. 6 months since the doctor's call, the day of reckoning finally arrived. Richard came home late, as had become his norm, reeking of alcohol and arrogance. I sat in the living room, the lights dimmed, waiting for him. "Well, look at you, playing the waiting wife," Richard sneered as he stumbled in. "What's the occasion, counting down the days to my demise?" His words, meant to wound, barely scratched the surface of my resolve. I had grown immune to his barbs. "Actually, yes," I replied calmly. "It's been 6 months, Richard. Aren't you curious about how much time you have left?" Richard laughed, a hollow sound filled with denial. "I feel fine, Eleanor. Better than ever, in fact. Death can wait." The irony of his statement was almost amusing. He was so engrossed in his lie that he had lost touch with reality. "But there's something you should know," I continued, my voice steady. "It wasn't me who received that diagnosis 6 months ago. It was you." For a moment, there was silence. Richard's face, previously flushed with drunken confidence, paled. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The terminal illness, Richard. It's yours," I said, the words feeling heavy in the air. Richard's laughter was manic, tinged with hysteria. "You're lying. This is just some sick game you're playing." But as the reality of my words began to sink in, his facade crumbled. The man who stood before me was no longer the arrogant Richard I had known. He was scared, lost, a shadow of his former self. "You knew, all this time you knew?" he stammered, his voice breaking. "I did," I admitted, "and I watched as you squandered your days, thinking they were mine." The room was filled with a tense silence, the weight of years of lies and deception hanging heavy between us. In that moment, I saw Richard for what he was, a man consumed by his own selfish desires, now faced with the consequences of his actions. The next morning, Richard was gone. He had left without a word, leaving behind only the echo of his broken pride. I stood in the empty house, a sense of relief washing over me. The game was over. The lies were unraveled. In his quest for a life free of responsibility, Richard had lost everything. As I stood there, I realized that this was not a victory. There was no joy in watching a man fall from grace, even one as undeserving as Richard. What I felt was a profound sense of freedom, the chains of a loveless marriage finally broken. The drama, the revenge, it was all over. I was free to start anew, to find peace in a life unburdened by the weight of Richard's deceit. It was a fresh start, a chance to rediscover the person I had lost in the shadow of a failing marriage. And as I looked out the window at the rising sun, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter in my life was waiting to be written, and for the first time in a long time I was ready to embrace it. In the weeks that followed Richard's departure, a profound sense of tranquility settled over the house. It was as if his absence had lifted a heavy veil, allowing light and air to fill spaces darkened by years of resentment and pain. I spent my days reacquainting myself with the simple pleasures of life, reading books I had long neglected, tending to the garden that had once been my sanctuary, and reconnecting with old friends. One afternoon, Claire visited me. She looked frail, but her eyes still sparkled with the same sharp intelligence and warmth. We sat in the garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and the gentle hum of life. "Eleanor, I heard about Richard," Claire began, her voice tinged with sadness. "I'm sorry it had to end this way." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's all right, Claire. It was long overdue. We were both prisoners in that marriage. Now we're free." Claire nodded, a small smile gracing her lips. "You were always the daughter I never had, Eleanor. Richard's choices are his own. You shouldn't have to pay for his mistakes." Her words were a balm to my soul. In all the years of my tumultuous marriage, Claire had been a constant source of support and understanding. "Claire, I want to thank you," I said, my voice heavy with emotion, "for everything. You've been more of a family to me than anyone else." As we sat there, basking in the serenity of the garden, I realized how much of my life I had spent under Richard's shadow. But no more. I was my own person, with dreams and desires that extended beyond the confines of a loveless marriage. The next chapter of my life was just beginning, and I was determined to make it count. I would travel, write that book I always talked about, maybe even fall in love again. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. As for Richard, I heard he had left town, chasing after some illusory freedom that would always be just out of reach. I felt no malice towards him, only a distant pity for a man who could never find contentment in what he had. Life, I had learned, was too short for regrets and bitterness. It was a gift to be cherished, a canvas to be painted with bold, bright colors. As Claire and I laughed and reminisced, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The drama, the pain, the revenge, it was all behind me. Ahead lay a path of my own making, a journey towards self-discovery and happiness. And as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter, a new life, a new Eleanor. As I stood in our living room, watching Richard pace, a sense of dread washed over me. This was the morning we were supposed to embark on our 30th anniversary trip, a journey that promised to rekindle the flame in our marriage that had been flickering out over the years. But Richard, my husband of 3 decades, was a picture of anxiety and distance, not the excited partner I had expected. "Richard, is everything okay? You seem preoccupied," I asked, my voice laced with concern. It was unlike him to be so distracted, especially today. He stopped pacing and turned to me. His eyes, once a source of warmth and comfort, now evaded mine as if hiding a painful secret. "Elaine, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice devoid of its usual tenderness. "I can't make the trip. Something urgent has come up at work, and I need to handle it." The words hit me like a cold wave. "On our anniversary? Can it wait?" I couldn't mask the disappointment in my voice. This trip was more than just a vacation. It was supposed to be a new beginning for us. Richard's response was curt, a sharp contrast to his normally considerate demeanor. "Business doesn't wait. You know how it is," he said almost mechanically. "But we've been planning this for months, Richard. Can it be postponed?" I pressed on, hoping for some indication that he shared my disappointment. "It's not negotiable, Elaine." His tone was firm, leaving no room for discussion. "I expect you to understand." Understand? How could I? I watched in silence as Richard hurriedly grabbed a few essentials and left, the door closing with a finality that felt symbolic. The man who had promised to grow old with me was now a stranger, his actions shrouded in mystery. Once alone, my mind raced with confusion and suspicion. This wasn't like the Richard I knew. The man who once couldn't wait to spend time with me now seemed to find any excuse to be away. Determined to unearth the truth, I went to our bedroom and started searching through his things. It was unlike me to pry, but the gnawing doubt left me no choice. Then, amidst his neatly folded shirts and socks, I found it, a small, crumpled receipt from a high-end jewelry store. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, revealing an expensive purchase made just a week ago. A necklace, luxurious and elegant, and certainly not for me. I hadn't received a gift from Richard in years. My heart raced as I pieced together the painful puzzle. Richard was having an affair. A wave of emotions crashed over me. Betrayal, anger, sadness. I realized I couldn't let this pass unchecked. Richard had to answer for his deceit, and I was going to make sure of it. The trip might have been canceled, but my journey to confront the truth and demand accountability from the man I thought I knew had just begun. The house felt eerily silent after Richard left. I sat at the dining table, the crumpled receipt from the jewelry store in front of me. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was not the first sign of Richard's infidelity, but merely the latest in a series of subtle changes I had been too naive to acknowledge. I thought back to the late nights he claimed were spent at work, the sudden weekend meetings, and the decreasing number of calls he made to check in on me. Each memory was a piece of a jigsaw puzzle I had refused to complete until now. Armed with a resolve hardened by betrayal, I decided it was time to take action. I couldn't confront Richard without solid proof. I needed to know more, to understand the extent of his deception. My first step was to call the jewelry store. Disguising my voice, I inquired about the necklace on the receipt. The salesperson, eager to help, confirmed that the piece was indeed purchased by Richard, and he had mentioned it was a gift for someone special. My heart sank at those words. Next, I turned to Richard's phone records. I knew it was an invasion of privacy, but the trust that once held our marriage together had already been shattered. Scrolling through his call history, I saw numerous calls to a number I didn't recognize, often late at night or early in the morning. I jotted it down, my mind racing with anger and hurt. The following day, I followed Richard. I felt like a character in a cheap detective novel, but desperation drove me. I watched from a distance as he met with a young woman, half his age, at a cafe. They laughed and talked with a familiarity that twisted the knife in my heart. I took photos as proof, each snapshot a testament to his betrayal. That evening, when Richard returned home, acting as if nothing was amiss, I confronted him. "Richard, who is she?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked at me, confusion clouding his face. "Who are you talking about, Elaine?" "Don't play dumb, Richard. The woman you were with today, the one you bought the necklace for." I threw the photos on the table in front of him. Richard's face went pale, but he quickly regained his composure. "Elaine, you're being paranoid. She's just a colleague from work." "A colleague?" I scoffed. "I'm not a fool, Richard. I've seen the way you two are together. It's clear you're having an affair." Richard's expression hardened. "You've been spying on me? Invading my privacy?" "Yes, I have. Because you've been lying to me. How long has this been going on, Richard?" He averted his gaze, his silence confirming my suspicions. Rage and disappointment battled within me. This was the man I had built a life with, and he was treating our marriage like it was nothing. "I want the truth, Richard. I deserve that much," I said, my voice breaking. Richard finally met my gaze, his eyes cold and detached. "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing her. It started a few months ago. Happy now?" His words were like daggers, each one piercing through the remnants of the trust and love I had for him. I felt a surge of anger, but beneath it there was an overwhelming sense of betrayal. "How could you do this to us, Richard, to me?" My voice trembled, barely containing the hurt. "Was our marriage, our life together, just a joke to you?" Richard sighed, a mixture of frustration and indifference. "It's not that simple, Elaine. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I challenged, fighting back tears. "Make me understand why you threw away 30 years for a fling." He shrugged, his nonchalance fueling my anger. "Things change, Elaine. People change. What we had, it's not the same anymore." I stared at him, incredulous. This was not the man I married, not the partner I had loved and trusted. He was a stranger wearing Richard's face. "Is that all I get? A cliché? No remorse, no apology?" I asked, my voice rising. Richard remained silent, his lack of response speaking volumes. I knew then that our marriage was beyond repair. The man before me was not the one I had vowed to spend my life with. He had chosen his path, and it was time for me to choose mine. "I want a divorce, Richard," I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. Richard looked at me, finally showing a flicker of emotion. "You're serious?" "More than I've ever been. I can't be with someone who has so little respect for me, for what we built together." My decision was firm, born out of pain and betrayal, but also out of a newfound strength. Richard didn't argue. He knew as well as I did that there was no going back from this. That night, I lay in bed, the weight of my decision heavy on my heart. I had lost the man I loved, but in the process, I had found a part of myself that I didn't know existed. A part that was strong, resilient, and ready to face a new beginning. The morning after confronting Richard about his affair, I woke up feeling like I was in the middle of a nightmare. The comfort of our bedroom now felt like a hollow shell of the life we had built together. I sat up, knowing that today was not just another day. It was the day I would start taking control of my life. As I made coffee, the silence of the house was deafening. Richard had spent the night in the guest room, a symbolic distance that spoke louder than words. I knew I had to plan my next steps carefully. It wasn't just about ending my marriage, it was about reclaiming my dignity. When Richard finally emerged, he looked like a man defeated, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a sullen resignation. "Elaine, about yesterday," he began, his voice trailing off. "What about it, Richard? You admitted to your affair. What more is there to say?" I cut him off, not interested in any excuses he might have. I never intended to hurt you," he said, looking down at his feet. I laughed, a bitter, scornful laugh. "You didn't intend to hurt me? What did you think would happen, Richard? Did you think I'd never find out? Or did you just not care?" He didn't answer, and in his silence, I found my resolve strengthening. "You know what, Richard? It doesn't matter. Your intentions don't change what you did. I want a divorce, and I want it as soon as possible." Richard finally looked at me, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Elaine, please, let's talk about this. We can go to counseling. We can try to work this out." "Counseling? Now you want to try?" "It's too late for that, Richard. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." I could see the realization dawning on him that I was serious. For years I had put his needs before mine, forgiving his shortcomings and overlooking his flaws. But not anymore. "Elaine, I'm sorry," he finally muttered. "Sorry doesn't change what you did. It doesn't erase the betrayal," I said, my voice steady, even though inside I was crumbling. I spent the day consulting a lawyer and making plans for my future. I was determined to not let Richard's actions define the rest of my life. I would start fresh, no matter how daunting that seemed. That evening, as I lay in bed, I realized that despite the pain and betrayal, I felt a sense of empowerment. I was taking charge of my destiny, no longer a passive player in Richard's deceitful game. For years, I had clung to the hope that our love would prevail, that we would overcome any obstacle. But now I saw the truth. Our marriage was a facade, one that Richard had shattered with his infidelity. As I stared at the ceiling, lost in my thoughts, the door creaked open. Richard stood there, a mix of defiance and desperation in his eyes. "Elaine, we need to talk about how we're going to handle this. The divorce, I mean." I sat up, steeling myself. "Handle it? You'll hear from my lawyer. That's how we'll handle it." "Elaine, be reasonable. Think about what you're doing. We can sort this out without lawyers, without making it messy," he pleaded. "Reasonable?" I echoed, incredulous. "You cheat on me, lie to me, and now you want me to be reasonable?" "It's beyond that, Richard. You made it messy the moment you decided to betray our vows." He took a step forward, his hands reaching out as if to find some connection, some remnant of the love we once shared. "I know I messed up, but we've been together for 30 years. That has to count for something." "It did count for something, Richard. It counted for everything, until you threw it away. 30 years, and you decided that wasn't enough," I said, my voice laced with a mix of sorrow and indignation. Richard's face fell, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "So that's it then? You're just going to throw away everything we had?" "Throw away? No, Richard, you threw it away. I'm just picking up the pieces," I replied, my resolve unwavering. He stood there for a moment as if waiting for me to change my mind, to offer some glimmer of hope, but there was none left to give. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he turned and left the room. Lying in the dark, I realized the enormity of the path ahead. The divorce would be just the beginning. There would be challenges, heartaches, and moments of doubt, but there would also be freedom, a chance to rediscover who I was before Richard, before the lies and betrayal. As I drifted off to sleep, a single thought echoed in my mind. I would not only survive this, I would emerge stronger, forged by the fire of betrayal, and tempered by the resolve to never again be anyone's victim. The days following my decision to divorce Richard were a whirlwind of activity. I met with my lawyer, discussing the best strategy to ensure I came out of this marriage with what I deserved. The hurt from Richard's betrayal still lingered, but it was now accompanied by a burning desire for retribution. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some financial documents, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There, hidden amongst bank statements and bills, were receipts and documents for a luxury apartment, one that Richard had rented in the city. Rage boiled within me as I realized that this was where he had been taking her, his mistress. This wasn't just a fleeting affair. He had invested time, money, and effort into this deception. I knew then that my retribution needed to be more than just emotional. It needed to hit Richard where it hurt him the most, his his pride, and his wallet. With meticulous planning, I began my campaign. I reached out to some mutual friends and subtly revealed Richard's infidelity. I watched as the news spread, tarnishing the reputation he had so carefully built. The man who prided himself on his status in our social circles was now the subject of pity and disdain. But I didn't stop there. I made sure that every detail of our divorce proceedings highlighted his infidelity and financial duplicity. My lawyer, skilled in unraveling complex marital finances, ensured that Richard's hidden assets were brought to light. During one particularly tense meeting, Richard sat across from me, his face a mask of controlled anger. "You're dragging my name through the mud, Elaine. Is this really necessary?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. "Necessary? Richard, you made a mockery of our marriage. This is the consequence of your actions." He clenched his jaw, his hands forming tight fists. "You're going to regret this. I'll make sure of it." His threat was meant to intimidate me, but I had grown immune to his manipulations. Regret? The only thing I regret is not seeing who you truly were sooner. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, Richard's true nature became increasingly evident. He tried to hide assets, dodge alimony payments, and smear my character. But each attempt only strengthened my resolve to see this through, to ensure he faced the consequences of his betrayal. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had won a significant portion of our shared assets, and Richard was ordered to pay a substantial amount in alimony. But more than the financial victory, it was the knowledge that I had stood up to him, that I had not let his betrayal define me, that felt like my greatest triumph. As I walked out of the courtroom, I knew that this was just the beginning of my new life. A life where I was no longer bound to a man who had shown me nothing but deceit. A life where I could finally start to heal and move forward. With the divorce finalized, I found myself standing at the threshold of a new chapter in my life. The sense of liberation was overwhelming, yet daunting. For the first time in years, my future was mine to shape, free from Richard's deceitful shadow. As I began to rebuild my life, I realized that the marriage had taken more from me than I had admitted. My interests, passions, and friendships had been sidelined in my efforts to be the perfect wife to Richard. Now it was time to rediscover Elaine Thompson, the woman before the wife. I started by reconnecting with old friends, many of whom I had lost touch with during my marriage. As I shared my story, I found a network of support and understanding. Their indignation at Richard's actions and their admiration for my strength in facing him gave me a sense of vindication. One evening, over dinner with a group of close friends, the conversation inevitably turned to Richard and the aftermath of our divorce. "Elaine, you really showed him," exclaimed my friend Marissa, her eyes sparkling with a mix of amusement and respect. "He thought he could get away with it, but you turned the tables beautifully." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I couldn't let him think he could betray me without consequences. "And the way you exposed his financial secrets. That was brilliant," added another friend, David. "He really underestimated you." Their words bolstered my resolve. I had not only stood up to Richard, but had also exposed him for who he truly was. The community's perception of him had shifted drastically, and he was no longer the respected figure he once was. However, the path to rebuilding my life wasn't just about settling scores with Richard. It was also about finding myself again. I enrolled in art classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. Each stroke of the brush on the canvas was therapeutic, a way of expressing the emotions I had bottled up for years. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, finding purpose in helping others. It was during these moments of giving back that I felt a true sense of fulfillment, a stark contrast to the hollow life I had lived with Richard. Yet, Richard's shadow still lingered. One afternoon, as I was leaving the art studio, my phone rang. It was Richard. I hesitated for a moment before answering, curious about what he could possibly have to say. "Elaine, we need to talk." Richard's voice came through, a hint of desperation in his tone. "Talk? About what, Richard? The divorce is final. There's nothing left to discuss," I replied, my guard up. "It's not about the divorce. I'm in a bit of a situation," he said, his voice faltering. I paused, a part of me feeling a twinge of curiosity. "What kind of situation?" I've made some bad investments. I'm in financial trouble, Elaine. Serious trouble, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't help but feel a sense of ironic justice. Richard, who had always prided himself on his financial acumen, now found himself in the pit he had dug for himself. Richard, your financial issues are no longer my concern. You made your bed, I responded, my voice firm. I know, but I was hoping maybe you could help me out, just temporarily, he pleaded. The audacity of his request took me aback. After everything he had put me through, he had the gall to ask for my help. Help you? After you cheated, lied, and tried to hide your assets during the divorce? You must be joking, I said, incredulity lacing my words. I'm serious, Elaine. I wouldn't ask if it weren't urgent. I might lose everything, he pressed. Richard, you lost everything the moment you decided to betray our marriage. I suggest you find another way to solve your problems, I said, ending the call. As I put the phone down, a sense of empowerment washed over me. The Richard who had once controlled and manipulated me was now at the mercy of his own poor decisions. I had moved on, building a life filled with new passions, friends, and a sense of purpose. The road ahead was still long, and I knew there would be challenges. But for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, the architect of my own destiny. Richard was a chapter closed, a painful lesson learned, but also the catalyst for my transformation into a stronger, more independent version of myself. In the months following our divorce, Richard's life seemed to unravel at the seams. The once respected businessman was now a shadow of his former self, his poor choices catching up to him. I heard snippets of his misfortunes through mutual acquaintances, each story a testament to his rapidly declining situation. One day I received an unexpected visit from Richard. He stood at my doorstep, a man defeated. His clothes were disheveled, a far cry from the meticulously dressed Richard Ward once knew. Elaine, I need to talk to you. It's important, he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I hesitated, but eventually led him into the living room. His presence in the house we once shared felt invasive, a reminder of a painful past. What is it, Richard? I thought we had nothing left to say to each other, I said, my arms crossed. It's about the money I owe, he started, unable to meet my eyes. I've been drowning in debt. The investments I made, they've gone south. I'm on the brink of bankruptcy. I listened, feeling a mix of vindication and pity. Richard, who had always prided himself on his financial prowess, was now crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. Elaine, I was wondering if you could lend me some money. Just enough to get back on my feet, he pleaded. The request left me speechless. After everything he had done, he still had the audacity to ask for my help. Richard, you must be out of your mind. Why would I help you after you betrayed me, after you tried to cheat me out of what was rightfully mine? I said, the bitterness evident in my voice. I know I've made mistakes, Elaine, terrible ones, but I'm desperate. I have nowhere else to turn, he said, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. Your mistakes were your own doing, Richard. You chose to betray our marriage, to lie, to deceive. You chose to live beyond your means, chasing after a life filled with greed and infidelity. It's not my responsibility to save you from the consequences of your actions, I replied, my resolve firm. Richard's face contorted with a mix of anger and desperation. So that's it? You're just going to watch me fall? You didn't seem to have any qualms watching our marriage fall apart. You made your choices, Richard. Now you have to live with them, I said, standing my ground. He looked around the room, a room that once symbolized our life together, now a symbol of his downfall. I never thought it would come to this. I thought I could handle everything. Thinking you could handle everything was your biggest mistake. You overestimated yourself, and now you're paying the price, I said, the finality in my voice signaling the end of our conversation. Richard stood up, a broken man. As he walked to the door, he turned to me one last time. I really did love you, Elaine, in my own way. I wish I could believe that, Richard. But love doesn't destroy, doesn't deceive. What you had for me wasn't love. Goodbye, Richard, I said, closing the door behind him. As I watched him walk away, a part of me felt sorry for the man he had become. But I knew that any sympathy for Richard was misplaced. He was the architect of his own downfall, a man who let his ego and desires lead him down a path of destruction. In that moment, I realized that my journey was not just about overcoming Richard's betrayal. It was about rising above it, about finding strength in adversity. I had not only survived the storm, but I had also emerged stronger, ready to face a future that was entirely my own making. Months passed since Richard's desperate visit, and my life had taken on a rhythm of peace and self-discovery. I had grown accustomed to the solitude and the freedom it brought. However, the last chapter of my story with Richard was yet to be written. One crisp autumn morning, as I tended to my garden, a task that had become a source of joy, I received a call from Marissa. "Elaine, have you seen the news?" Marissa's voice was tinged with disbelief. "No, what happened?" I asked, a sense of apprehension building inside me. "It's Richard. He's been arrested for embezzlement and fraud. It's all over the news," she said. I stood in silence, the phone almost slipping from my hand. The news was shocking, yet somehow it felt like an inevitable conclusion to Richard's self-destructive path. "Are you okay, Elaine?" Marissa asked, concern evident in her voice. I don't know. I need some time to process this," I replied, my mind racing. I spent the day in a daze, reflecting on the entirety of our shared history. Richard, the man I once loved and trusted, had fallen so far from the person I thought he was. His arrest was a stark reminder of the consequences of greed and betrayal. That evening, as I sat by the fireplace, a sense of clarity washed over me. Richard's downfall was not my doing, but the result of his own choices. I had moved on, building a life that was no longer overshadowed by his deceit. The next day, a letter arrived from Richard. His handwriting was shaky, the words of a broken man. He wrote of his regrets, his mistakes, and his realization of the pain he had caused. He asked for my forgiveness, not expecting redemption, but seeking some solace in his remorse. I read the letter several times, each reading bringing a wave of mixed emotions. In the end, I decided to not respond. Forgiveness was a journey, and I was not ready to embark on it, at least not for Richard. As I moved forward with my life, I found strength in the lessons I had learned. The pain of betrayal had been transformed into a resilience that guided me. I had found a sense of purpose in my passions and a community that valued and supported me. The final chapter of my story with Richard had closed, not with revenge, but with the realization that my happiness and peace were no longer tied to him or his actions. I had reclaimed my life, not as a victim of Richard's betrayal, but as a survivor, stronger and more self-assured. In the solitude of my garden, I found moments of reflection. The blooming flowers with their vibrant colors and resilience reminded me of my journey. Like them, I had weathered storms, but I had emerged more beautiful and robust. My story with Richard was a chapter of my past, a painful lesson in love and trust. But it was also a chapter that forged me into the person I am today, independent, strong, and content in my own skin. As I looked towards the future, I realized that my life was now a blank canvas, ready for new experiences, new joys, and new challenges. I was no longer defined by my past, but empowered by it. I had found a new sense of self, one that was not reliant on anyone else for validation or happiness. Richard's downfall, though tragic, served as a stark reminder of the consequences of living a life driven by deceit and selfishness. It reinforced my belief in living authentically, with integrity and respect for myself and others. In the end, the greatest revenge was not in seeing Richard fall, but in seeing myself rise. I had turned my pain into power, my betrayal into strength. My life was now my own, a beautiful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As I closed the chapter on Richard and our shared past, I embraced the unknown future with open arms, ready to write new stories, create new memories, and live a life filled with purpose and joy. "I can't do this anymore, Nathan. You've cheated again. Let's just get divorced." My voice was steady, but inside I was crumbling. The living room of our modest home, once a sanctuary of love and laughter, felt cold and uninviting. Nathan stood there, his back to the fading sunset outside the window. His silhouette was as hard and unyielding as the man himself. "Divorce? Really, Elise? After all this time?" Nathan's voice was laced with sarcasm. He turned to face me, a smirk playing on his lips, the same lips that whispered sweet nothings and later lies. "Yes, Nathan, 4 years of marriage and all I've earned are lies and betrayal. Even your parents agree with me." I felt a surge of courage, bolstered by the unexpected support from his parents. I saw their disapproving glances at their son, their sympathetic looks towards me. Nathan's face hardened. My parents? Ha! What do they know about our marriage? They know enough. My words were a whisper, but they sliced through the tension in the room. Nathan's smirk vanished, replaced by a sneer. Fine, Elise, you want a divorce? You'll get it. But remember, you're leaving with nothing. No alimony, no child support. You can take my parents and those brats with you. His words stung, but I stood my ground. I don't care about your conditions, Nathan. All I know is I can't be your wife any longer. He scoffed. You think you can survive without me? You're nothing without me, Elise. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I'd rather have nothing than live a lie with you. Nathan stepped closer, his face inches from mine. You know, being cheated on. Maybe it's also the fault of the person being cheated on. Ever thought of that, Elise? His words were a slap across my face. I recoiled, not from his proximity, but from the venom in his voice. The Nathan I once knew, the man I fell in love with, was gone. In his place stood a stranger, cold and cruel. I've grown tired of your whining and your pathetic face. You know what? A good-looking divorced man is quite the catch. His voice dripped with arrogance. I stared at him, my heart racing with a mix of fear and anger. Is this really who you are, Nathan? He shrugged. Take it or leave it, Elise. I don't care. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm leaving, Nathan, and I'm taking our daughters with me. They don't deserve a father like you. Nathan laughed, a hollow, mocking sound. Good luck, Elise. You'll come crawling back. They always do. But I knew I wouldn't. I turned my back on Nathan, on our life together, and walked away. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed in my heart. It was over. The battle was just beginning, but I had taken the first step towards freedom. As I walked away, I realized this was not just the end. It was a new beginning. The morning after I left Nathan, I found myself at his parents' house. The air was thick with unspoken words as I sat at their kitchen table, my twin daughters playing quietly at my feet. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton, Nathan's parents, exchanged a glance full of sorrow and regret. Elise, we need to tell you something about Nathan, Mr. Hamilton began, his voice heavy with unease. Something we should have shared a long time ago. I nodded, bracing myself for more revelations. Nathan has always been, well, charming to women. Since high school, Mrs. Hamilton interjected, her voice trembling. He would date multiple girls, juggling them without a care. My heart sank. The man I married, the father of my children, was a habitual cheater. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment, it was a pattern. We thought he changed when he met you, Mr. Hamilton continued, his voice filled with disappointment. But we were wrong. We're so sorry, Elise. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, but mostly I felt betrayed. Not just by Nathan, but by everyone who knew and said nothing. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out as a whisper, more to myself than to them. We hoped he had changed, Mrs. Hamilton said, tears in her eyes, but we were wrong. We failed you both. The revelation was a bitter pill to swallow. Nathan's parents, whom I had come to love and respect, had kept this crucial piece of information from me. Yet their remorse was genuine. Thank you for telling me now, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But I need to think about what to do next. As I left their house, my mind was racing. Nathan's betrayal wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a part of who he was. And I had been blind to it all. In the following days, I poured my energy into my job search. With a renewed sense of purpose, I landed a position at a marketing firm. It wasn't just about financial independence. It was about reclaiming my identity. I also started gathering evidence of Nathan's infidelity. Every receipt, every late-night call, every unexplained absence. I meticulously documented everything. If Nathan thought I was going to walk away quietly, he was sorely mistaken. The final straw came a week later when I discovered another love letter in Nathan's belongings, filled with passionate declarations. It was like a punch to the gut. Confronting him wasn't an option. I needed a different approach, an approach that would hit him where it hurt the most. I called my lawyer and set the wheels in motion for the divorce. Nathan would learn the hard way that betrayal comes with a price, and I was going to make sure he paid it in full. I sat across from my lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, in his stark, unadorned office. The papers in front of me were a tangible representation of my newfound resolve. Everything's in order, Mr. Jacobs said, adjusting his glasses. Once Nathan is served these papers, the process begins. Are you ready for this? I nodded, feeling a mix of apprehension and determination. I am. Nathan needs to understand that he can't just walk over people without consequences. Mr. Jacobs gave me an understanding look. And the evidence of his affairs? I have them, I replied, handing him a folder thick with documentation. Photos, messages, receipts, everything that painted the sordid picture of Nathan's betrayal. Good. This will strengthen your case for alimony and child support. It's not just about the money, Elise. It's about holding him accountable. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of empowerment. I wasn't just a victim of Nathan's infidelity. I was a woman taking control of her life. The following weeks were a whirlwind. I juggled my new job, caring for my daughters, and the divorce proceedings. It was exhausting, but with each passing day, I felt stronger, more capable. Then came the day Nathan was served the divorce papers. His reaction was immediate and explosive. He called me, his voice dripping with anger and disbelief. Are you out of your mind, Elise? You think you can take me to the cleaners and get away with it? I held the phone away from my ear, his tirade a distant, angry buzz. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke calmly. It's not about revenge, Nathan. It's about fairness. You broke our marriage vows, and now you have to face the consequences. You won't get a dime from me, he spat. We'll see, I replied, and ended the call. That night, I lay awake, thinking about the path ahead. It was going to be a tough battle, but I was ready for it. Nathan had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. I thought about my daughters, sleeping peacefully in the next room. They deserved a better life, a life free from the shadow of their father's deceit. And I was going to give it to them, no matter what it took. Nathan's true colors were showing, and everyone was going to see them. The charming, handsome man they knew was just a facade. Underneath lay a man capable of deceit and betrayal, and I was going to expose him for who he really was. The game had just begun, and I was playing to win. The courtroom was cold and sterile, the air charged with tension. I sat rigidly, my lawyer beside me as we waited for the judge to enter. Across the room, Nathan sat with his lawyer, his expression one of smug confidence. As the judge entered and proceedings began, I felt a knot in my stomach. This was it, the moment of truth. Nathan Taylor, the evidence presented by your wife indicates a pattern of infidelity and financial irresponsibility, the judge began, his voice stern. How do you respond to these allegations? Nathan stood, his posture relaxed, almost dismissive. Your Honor, my wife is exaggerating. Sure, I might have had a few indiscretions, but who hasn't? She's blowing this whole thing out of proportion. His cavalier attitude infuriated me. He still didn't grasp the severity of his actions. Mr. Taylor, this is a court of law, not a social club. I advise you to take these proceedings seriously, the judge warned. As the hearing progressed, Nathan's facade began to crumble. Each piece of evidence my lawyer presented seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Photos, messages, bank statements, the truth laid bare for all to see. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my hands trembling slightly. Your Honor, I entered this marriage believing in love and trust. What I got instead was deception and heartache. Nathan's actions have not only broken our family, but have also set a poor example for our children. Nathan rolled his eyes, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the judge. The impact of his actions goes beyond just emotional pain. Financially, I was left in a vulnerable position, having to start from scratch while caring for our daughters. I seek fair compensation, not out of spite, but out of necessity, I concluded, my voice steady. The judge nodded, making notes. Thank you, Mrs. Taylor. Your statement has been noted. As the hearing ended, Nathan approached me, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. You're going to regret this, Elise. You've made an enemy out of me. I met his gaze squarely. No, Nathan, you did that all by yourself. Leaving the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. This was more than just a legal battle. It was a fight for my dignity and the future of my children. Nathan had shown his true colors, and now he would face the consequences. The drama was far from over, but I had taken a significant step in reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever came next. The divorce settlement was more than just a legal victory. It was a moral one. Nathan had been ordered to pay a substantial amount in alimony and child support, a decision that left him seething. A few days after the ruling, I received a call from Nathan. His voice was a mix of anger and desperation. You think you've won, Elise? You think you can just take my money and run? You've ruined me." His words were meant to intimidate me, but I felt an inner strength that hadn't been there before. "This isn't about winning or losing, Nathan. It's about taking responsibility. You made your choices, and now you're facing the consequences. You'll pay for this. I'll make sure of it," he threatened. "Threats won't change anything, Nathan. It's time for you to start facing reality," I replied before ending the call. In the weeks that followed, Nathan tried various tactics to evade his financial obligations. But with the law on my side and a determined lawyer, we countered each attempt. Meanwhile, word of Nathan's actions and the divorce began to spread. His reputation, once that of a charming and successful businessman, was now tarnished. He faced scrutiny and judgment from those he once considered friends and colleagues. As I rebuilt my life, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Nathan was finally experiencing the fallout of his actions. His once carefree life was now filled with the repercussions of his choices. But it wasn't just about Nathan's downfall. This was also about my rise from the ashes of a broken marriage. I was building a new life for myself and my daughters, a life free from lies and betrayal. One evening, as I put my daughters to bed, my younger daughter looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Mommy, are you happy now?" Her question caught me off guard, but then I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, I am. We're going to be just fine." As I kissed them goodnight, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and in its wake, it had left a newfound strength and resilience in me. Nathan's downfall was a harsh reminder of the price of deceit, but it was also a testament to the power of standing up for oneself. I had fought for justice, not just for me, but for my children as well. The chapter of Nathan was closed, but a new chapter was beginning for us, one filled with hope and the promise of a brighter future. The world outside my window seemed brighter, the air fresher. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, and life had taken on a new rhythm. My daughters were thriving, happy and adjusted, and I had found fulfillment in my job and newfound independence. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Nathan. Hesitant, I answered. "Elise, you've destroyed my life." Nathan's voice was frantic, a stark contrast to his once cool demeanor. I sighed. "Nathan, you did that yourself. I just stopped accepting it." "I lost my job because of the scandal, Elise. Because of you." His voice cracked with desperation. "That was the result of your actions, Nathan, not mine," I replied firmly. "You think you're better off without me? You think you've won?" His words were laced with bitterness. "I didn't do this to win, Nathan. I did it to survive, to protect our children. This isn't a game, it's life, and it's time you took responsibility for yours." There was silence on the other end, and then he hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment, reflecting on how far I had come. In the months following the divorce, rumors of Nathan's behavior had circulated. His charming facade had crumbled, revealing the man beneath. He had lost his job, his reputation, and much of his social circle. The consequences of his actions were catching up to him. But for me, life was moving in a positive direction. I had reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and my relationship with my daughters had never been stronger. We had created a new family unit, one built on love, trust, and respect. As I left work that day, I thought about the journey I had been on, from the pain and betrayal to the fight for justice and the rebuilding of my life. It had been a difficult path, but one that led to growth and empowerment. Nathan's downfall was a harsh lesson in accountability. For me, it was a reminder that no matter how dark things seem, there is always a path to light. I picked up my daughters from school, their laughter and chatter filling the car. As we drove home, I realized that this was what true happiness felt like. It wasn't just about overcoming Nathan, it was about rediscovering myself and building a better future for my family. The road ahead was uncertain, but I faced it with a sense of hope and optimism. The chapter of Nathan was closed, but our story was just beginning. A story of resilience, strength, and the unbreakable bond of a mother and her children.